Ladies and gentlemen, it's election night. Hey, how are ya? Hey, how are ya? We're here. Oh my goodness, I cannot tell you how excited I am. All the work that's been going into it, everything I've been following, we're here. I have been full of anxiety all day. I've had a pit in my stomach. I barely slept the last 2 days. Not barely slept, but I didn't sleep well. There's a lot. Oh, look, the notifications are working. Isn't that sweet? That's super cool. All right. Thank you, Jackie. And we're going to get into it. So our plan for tonight, we've got some interviews that are going to start. We're going to have a couple of those. We're going to chat with some really cool people. We're going to watch some things unfold, hopefully good things. It's going to be a night, everyone. Pace yourself. I'm getting all amped up. I put on deodorant like 3 times today. I'm sweating through all of it. That's a given. That's a prior that we knew was going to happen, but we planned. We assessed. I'm wearing like my favorite Iowa shirt. I am Iowa in all the different languages, courtesy of Mary, who will be on later tonight. So, where are we? Right now, everything that you are hearing, nothing is official. I do not want to overreact to any sort of weird, anomalous results. It's very early. I went upstairs and I see Mary's in chat. She'll enjoy this. And I made Mary yell at me not to look at exit polling results in Florida, because there are some reports about exit polls, but exit polls this year are extra bad. They likely will lean Republican, and even the best things from exit polls, like, you can't really discern what's important until days later. It's really difficult. Oh, hi, Anne. Thanks for stopping in. It's difficult to really suss out any sort of narrative, any sort of results. Those things are not very indicative. They never are, and this year they're especially not. So try not to get worked up about any exit polls. Also, partial results. I'm going to show you something, and you're going to want to jump to conclusions, because it's early results. Somebody hold Ben Drury. All right, so for the first time, we'll kind of reveal, we'll open up here, and in this big map, you see it, I see it. It's right up there. Kentucky being blue. Hi, Mark. Thanks for the wave. I don't expect this to hold, so don't jump to conclusions too quickly. Also, sorry, I'm going to get Twitch chat open. Sorry if I'm missing people there. Hello, if you're joining on Twitch. Happy to have you, of course.
Are you watching me?
Oh no. Oh, I opened Twitch. All right, we had our first little doobly-doo. That's going to happen a lot. I'm a one-man crew. I'm doing my best to kind of get everything organized. There's a lot of moving pieces, so I ask for your patience, really, as we kind of step through this process. There's going to be snafus, absolutely, for sure. So if we look, 12% of vote counted. Now, this is a great foil for why we don't want to get too excited about things tonight. If we click into Kentucky and we start looking, I am no expert on which one of these counties is correct or incorrect, or where they are, or what the makeup is. Oftentimes, but this is not an absolute, so don't take this as an absolute, rural counties or less densely populated will be able to get results in fast, meaning that the Republican candidate may appear ahead earlier because less densely populated areas tend to be more Republican, etc. So, Nancy, Mary has put in her time. She has been keeping the mental state of this all together, and she'll join us about 7:30. She's slated to come on, so she's helping in many ways. So, when we look at this, we don't want to jump to conclusions about oh, look, McGrath is up 52 to 43. Like, that's a big swing or anything. This is complete partial results, and the partial results are not representative of the whole. So this is like not even like a poll in and of itself. This is not a representative sample. This is nothing. This, for all we know, this could be all the 11% most Democratic places in all of Kentucky. I don't have the expertise to go into that level of detail, so I'm not going to try. That is one thing that I guess I can promise you is I'm going to try to stay within the bounds of what I think I know. I'm going to give my best analysis that I can, but also promise not to try and mislead or point in directions that may not be correct. So the state of the race so far is that nothing has changed. There are no official counts. If I can call attention to a few things, we're gonna do kind of an overview for those of you who have not been around. So this is kind of my tier list of states to pay attention to. This almost should be Florida on its own. The reason that Florida is so important is they started counting absentee ballots 3 weeks ago. They're also not accepting any ballots that don't arrive by Election Day, if my understanding is correct. Florida will almost assuredly be called tonight. If Florida is called for Joe Biden, the race at that point is essentially over, and Joe Biden is by far not, oh, he's slightly favored. He is overwhelmingly favorited to win. If I can put this continuum is a great way to kind of show you this. So this is a map from 538, and it basically shows the most Republican district all the way through the snake chart to the most Democrat-leaning state, I should say, not district. So what it kind of is saying is that if Joe Biden wins Florida, basically he can even lose a couple of states back here and still get over this 270 line. Or if he wins North Carolina, it's not quite this cut and dry, but if Trump or to win kind of any of these 4 states, I guess I should move Georgia up if I haven't. That's going to be basically what I'm calling like a kill shot. That's going to essentially end Trump's chances to win. That could be called tonight. If Trump is going to win, he's going to have a very hard-fought battle in multiple states that will not count tonight. Winning Florida gives Trump about a 20% chance to win, whereas if Joe Biden wins it, it's a 99.9% chance. So things are a little back and forth. Pennsylvania, we absolutely will not know. So who knows what's going to happen there. And we'll try to key you in on what's going to come in tonight, what is not. So that's one to pay attention to. Sorry, Georgia gets moved up. Georgia has shifted very far blue in the last couple of days. There's a chance there could be 2 Senate seats going in Georgia, and the state itself could turn blue. It's going to be, it took a big shift, and it's pretty wild that originally I kind of had in this A tier. Arizona and North Carolina are going to be very important. Again, if Biden wins any of these 3, those are likely kind of kill shot states. The reason I have Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin up here, these are states that were kind of on the border, and Wisconsin, famously, Hillary Clinton lost, which essentially cost her the election. She lost by 0.7% of the vote. So that's going to be very, very, very close. It looks like it's more in Biden's favor, but you know, that was one of the canary in the coal mine kind of things where it was overlooked by the Clinton campaign. They did not campaign there at all, and then all of a sudden that was enough to flip it for Trump. So I don't think I have been particularly secretive about what my personal hopes are for the election, but I do want to bring forward that I'm going to try to kind of set those in a different bucket. And give you kind of the analysis as I see it unfolding from a purely data perspective. If I say paths to win are being closed off for Trump, for example, that's not something I'm saying, oh, because I hope Biden will win. That is, you know, according to the data and how we understand the polls and all the background research that I've done, that basically will lead us down a path that says unless there's something completely outside the realm of how we understand elections, this is going to get very difficult. So that is kind of the outline of where we're going from today. Touching back again, there have been reports, especially by, say, like Nate Silver. I'm going to pull up 538's. They have a live election coverage, so you can have something to read. Oh boy, sorry, that's gonna go a little ways. I'll leave this up so you can kind of read through some of these things. Good, I'm not blocking them. One of the things is Nate Silver's been tweeting a lot about exit polling in Florida. There's a particular county that is starting to lean very, very democratically as the polls go on. Again, I am not a super advanced statistician. I don't know those counties in particular and what their makeup looks like. So we're going to try to refrain from basically saying, hey, let's project this or project that. We're just going to go ahead and say they're exit poll data. They're a non-representative sample. Therefore, we don't want to draw any conclusions from that. So we're not going to try to go too far down the rabbit hole of, oh man, Trump's way up in Florida or Biden's way up in Florida because of exit polls. We're going to try to be cool. So the beginning of this is going to be a little slow as we kind of suss out and figure out what's real and what's not. Do you think third-party votes would hurt Trump more than Biden, specifically around Kanye West and I would say Joe Jorgensen, the Libertarian candidate? Those tend to pull more from Trump. I don't think that they are going to have an outsized impact. And when I say pull more from, I'm not talking like a vote for one of those two takes a vote away from Trump. It's a lot closer to something like, say, 60-40. So when you have 2% of the vote split 60-40, that's only like a 20% advantage, roughly, if we're going to use that. So don't worry too much about those. I don't think there is any impact that will be definitive enough to like decide a state. And it's also really hard to project that as it comes along. How many states do we think we will have solid ground to be called tonight? I have no idea. It's going to be the winner, no matter what, will not be announced tonight. That we know. A winner, the votes being counted every election night. There's never been a winner called. There's been a winner projected. But that does not mean that that candidate has won or anything of the sort. So we're not going to worry too much about the exact, but we do want to see, again, states like Florida that we know will be called. We also have something different. Let me see if I can find it. Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. If you go over to the New York Times, let me just go ahead and drag this over. Boop, boop. They are actually doing live projections of these three because they do believe that there could be results on these. And again, this is one of the top lines. Let me just sneak this up just a little bit here. Joe Biden wins one of these three states, he is likely to win the presidency. It's very important to keep in mind. What is the magic projected number that would secure victory for either candidate? 270 votes. Once one candidate gets 270 votes, they have won the presidency. That will, again, likely not be called tonight, but you can kind of start inferring some things, like if Joe Biden wins Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, there's not really a path left in order for Trump to make a comeback. There doesn't exist enough states for him to recover enough. So we're going to kind of keep it nice and loose on that front. And know that there will be days of counting. There will be lawsuits, undoubtedly. There have been particular parties that said, basically, we are going to start lawsuits no matter what. That's going to be a thing. There will be allegations of fraud. These are things that I would not pay too much attention to. They're just going to be thrown around a lot, and I don't like giving credence to that. In addition, one other thing, there's a lot of people who believe there will be violence outbreak at some of the polls. I don't like putting that negative energy out into the world. I think it's always fair to be cautious, but I don't think we should assume that one side is going to be violent or not. or that one side is going to be violent. Given the results, I think we just need to kind of hold back on most of that. Georgia is a recent one that might flip. Yes, they might actually flip the state and both Senate seats, which would be pretty huge. Nancy, regarding the 2016 election, if we have some time, depending, I can give you the top line result. The reason 2016, this will be my 2-minute breakdown here before we get to our first interview. There was some polling error, but it wasn't as far as what people thought, and there was also far, far more undecided voters. So say if you had 10% undecided voters, and Clinton was, I think, she was polling at like 45%, Trump was at 42%. Well, that's obviously that 10%, depending on where that breaks, is going to give the win to one of them. So, that is a huge deal, and people kind of underrepresented that. And if you just saw, it was called Donald J. Trump wins Kentucky. So there you go. And so if there is right now, first thing, the undecided voters is way, way smaller. There is not nearly as many. Biden is over 50% in most of them, which means even if Trump won 100% of undecided voters, he could get to, say, if he's at 52, Trump could get to 48%. Joe Biden wins Vermont. So there you go. We're going to see as these things kind of trickle in. And again, that's why we don't get excited about Kentucky. So let me go ahead and pull up that map here for you. Kentucky is now solid red, meaning that it has been called for Donald Trump. Vermont has now been called with 0% reporting. And this is basically, people wonder how this is. There's very, very advanced statistical models that basically figure out, okay, if this one county or this set of people vote in this particular way, we can kind of project the rest. It's not that they know for sure what the outcome is going to be. They just know that it's going to go for Biden. So Kentucky and Vermont will be in that realm. And I'm holding off for just a little bit. We're waiting for Doug Shaw. He's going to be a couple minutes late. No big deal. We're kind of freestyling jazz around here. And then we'll get to talk to you, Jackie, as well. Let me pull up my calendar. Jackie Pearson. So we're going to have kind of 2 interviews back to back. These will be a little bit less interactive, but they hopefully will bring a lot of context to how to look at things. Doug is a math professor at University of Northern Iowa, so he'll provide some great things regarding how to look at polls and things like that. Jackie's going to talk a little bit about her journey and activism. I don't want to spoil anything there, so we're going to hang out for another couple minutes, and then we're going to check in and see if Doug is around. I do need a couple minutes for setup in between most of these, so good. I can see when Doug joins, which will be great. So I will, just so you know the flow, kick it to like a BRB. I'll mute things, and then that way I can talk to the guests, make sure they're all ready, and then bring you guys in. We will have 5 interviews throughout the night. We're going to have Doug, again, University of Northern Iowa mathematics professor, Jackie Pearson, activist and generally good person. Then we're going to have Mary, my wife. She's excellent. Really excited for that conversation for some of you to kind of key in and learn a couple new things about our journey over the last 4 years. I'm going to back down my mic just a little bit, getting excited. Then we're going to have a state senate candidate, Sarah Trone Garriott, will join us around 8 p.m. She has an active race that's going on right now. I believe she is calling people, phone banking as we speak. That'll be really great. And then we'll have another little break to check in on the race. And then finally we'll have Adam O'Dell, composer, comedian, amazing human, to kind of round us out at 9:30. Great conversation with all these people in pre-interviews, and really excited to let you guys kind of get to meet these people and see what they're like. So with that, we can just we'll hang out for a little bit here. Hey, hello. Yes, Dr. Shaw. The records on turnout. It's a good point. We're going to break records for turnout. Just flatly, it's going to happen. That does not necessarily favor one party or the other, so we can go keep that in mind. Which polls do you put stock into for your own predictions? It's a great question. I like polling averages. If a particular state was supposed to be Biden plus 2 or 3, you're going to see results from, Trump plus 2 to Biden plus 7. They kind of vary. So you kind of figure out, and then you work your way down into finding an actual result and what the average is. And I think multiple surveys in aggregate can give you a better idea, provided that you are figuring out everything. So, oh, hi, Logan. And Doug is asking to join. So I'm going to kick it over to a BRB, and then I will bring you back with Doug. So stay tuned. Hello, Doug. We are on break. Oh, well, I guess they can't hear you. Hello, welcome back. We have Doug on the line, so I will go ahead and pull up his picture here. Doug Shaw, for those of you who don't know, is a professor of mathematics at the University of Northern Iowa. He does all kinds of amazing workshops. He's got a new one called OK Zoomer, has a great book that we'll preview as soon as he leaves. I'll show you the website and give you a tour. It's a lot of really cool things. I've really enjoyed all my time talking with Doug. So, ladies and gentlemen, Doug Shaw. Hey, it worked. Excellent. Let me pull up. There you go. I got the little ticker going. So, Doug, how are you today? How are you processing all of Election Day? And I've been very anxious all day. Yeah, I think you are not alone in that. And I just realized, sorry, I don't think I had your audio on, but now you're all good. So thank you.
And so that is who's going to win the election. And I'm not going to tell you a second time.
There you go. Well, you know what? That's on me for missing it. So Doug, you're professor of mathematics at University of Northern Iowa.
I am.
We talked a little bit about a fun little math class that you teach and kind of some goals that you have for your students. Do you want to kind of go over what that is and a little tie-in for election night things?
Well, it's Math 1100, and it's called Math for Decision Making, but instructors have a lot of leeway. It's a liberal arts math course, and we're using a textbook called Calling Bullshit, and it's not actually a textbook; it's a commercial book, and it's really, I tell my students, you can think of this as Defense Against the Dark Arts, or as the Dark Arts. I'm teaching people how people use mathematics, statistics, infographics to persuade or manipulate, and some fair techniques and not fair. And students can then be defending against that sort of thing, or they can learn to embrace and use that to persuade other people.
Oh boy, the entire beginning of my stream has been all about some of those dark arts, because right now we are having exit polls, and we don't need to get into the intricacies of exit polling. But can you talk a little bit about, you do talk about polls with your students?
Yes. So I don't think this is always deliberate, but people don't understand what a poll means, and it's not hard to explain. So I teach my students how to interpret polls, and I tell them from now on, this is what they have to do when they see a poll result, and then they can tell if a headline is fact or BS. And it's kind of cool, because the way I prep for classes, every morning I just look at my Facebook feed, find a headline, print it out, and then say, okay, this is the headline. Is it right? And so I can show you and your viewers that right now, if you like.
Oh, I would love that. And I even had a question in chat. Hey, Danny, what's your favorite poll that you look at? And so this is going to lead right into some of the dangers of trusting one poll to be the poll that is correct.
Right. And I'm not even talking right or wrong. I'm just talking about what a poll So a lot of times people will say a poll is wrong when the poll isn't wrong. People just don't understand what it means. So let's say you see this. Now, I can't see myself. So is this showing up?
Perfect. Yep.
Biden 52, Trump 48. If I see this and just this, I'm going to call the poll BS, because there's one piece of information that every reputable poll will show you, and that's the margin of error. And they're going to have the margin of error. Sometimes it's an italic type, very small at the bottom of the article. So you'll have to hunt for it. But if it's a reputable news story, it's going to be there. So I'm going to add a margin of error to my poll right now. I'm writing Mo, not the guy from the Three Stooges. Oh God, that was a dad joke. MOE for margin of error, plus or minus 5%. Okay, now it's a legit poll because you see those three things: Trump, Biden, margin of error, or it could be 3 or 4 candidates. Doesn't matter. You need to see that.
Yes.
So here's what you do with the margin of error. You add, first thing you do is you add or subtract it to the result. So let's say I want to know what this poll says about Biden. I'm going to add and subtract 5%. So this is saying that Biden is somewhere in the interval 47 to 57.
Gotcha.
I added and subtracted 5 to 52 to get that number. So
right on.
When you see a poll, you take the margin of error, you add and subtract it to the number you're interested in. That gives you a range. Now, is Biden in that range? Nobody knows, but I will tell you there's a 95% chance that he's in that range. And that's what the poll is saying. So is this poll saying Biden is ahead? No, it is not. This poll is saying we have no idea.
Because the headline naturally would be Biden ahead by 4 points.
Right. And the problem is the headline should say, we spent $1 million on this poll and the result is we know nothing. But that's not a good headline, and nobody wants to spend the money on a poll only to find out it's inconclusive. Now, what's 95%? I want you to picture this. Picture 20 people. Okay? All but one. That's 95%.
So pretty good.
So if there are 50 polls in the United States, one per state, 2 of them are not going to be in that interval.
Right.
So 95% chance, and then the other numbers you need to know are 2.5%. 2.5% of the time you're going to be above the range, and 2.5% you're going to be below. So this poll here, Biden 52, Trump 48, is saying there's a 95% chance Biden is between 47 and 57, 2.5 that he's above, 2.5 that he's below.
So not a whole lot of really solid definitive information is what you're getting at.
For this poll, no. Now some polls, yes. So you have to do that work because no one else is going to do it for you. You add and subtract the margin of error. That's going to give you a range. You look at the Biden range and you look at the Trump range. If they overlap, then you don't know who's ahead. If they don't, then you know that one of them is ahead. And that's true for every poll, not just presidential polls.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I was talking about beforehand is people are using exit polls, which introduces another fun variable into the situation, which is you are grabbing whoever is at the poll, which is in no way guaranteed to be a representative sample, which can, of course, skew your results. And so I think what we're getting at here is polls are an instrument, but wielded incorrectly. And I think your analogy for the dark arts is spot on.
Now, you mentioned exit polls, okay? It's not just people who are willing to talk to you, and that depends on the person, right? So
Yes.
I go up to somebody, they'll talk to me because I'm not a threat. I'm portly, fat, balding, I'm very, very harmless looking. Okay, now somebody sees Danny Reddy asking the question. Here's a guy who's so handsome he can make someone do crazy things, right? They want to stay away from you and your magnetism. So they're not going to want to talk to you. They're going to run home to their spouses and say, oh my God, I saw this guy, but don't worry, I didn't talk to him because, my God, that guy's handsome, right? So Danny and I could do the same exit poll and get a different set of people talking to us.
Yeah. And that is just introducing not just, there is some sort of error that we can figure out. It is an unknown error, which is the worst kind.
Right. And now let's talk race. Okay?
Yeah.
Danny and I are white guys. So there are people who would not tell us how they voted because they would be a little afraid of who we would talk to and, all that stuff. And however, if we were African American women, a different set of people might feel comfortable talking to us.
Yeah,
and
so it gets very difficult.
Yeah.
And even on top of all of those things, we're in the middle of a pandemic, which is raging here in Iowa. And the people who are going to polls is not even a representative sample of people who normally vote, because mail-in balloting is a whole different thing. So it's been quite a chaotic thing. I know there's been a lot of very close polling, a lot of things that oscillate around certain results. So I guess, is there anything that you can think of that I've been telling my viewers mostly today, just wait till we have all of the results, and then you will have perfect results. Is there any other of those tactics or things that you talk about with students that you can tell people to be aware of tonight?
Well, it depends on the set. So, like, for example, we're going to find out Florida relatively quickly because of the way they count their ballots. They do it fast and early. If Trump wins Florida, then the answer is wait, we still don't know.
Yes.
If Biden wins Florida, he's going to win.
Yep.
Somebody told me an interesting thing about how these polls are related. Washington, D.C. has 3 electoral votes?
Yes.
Something like that, right? But if Washington, D.C. goes Trump, you can't say, well, okay, that's just 3 electoral votes for Trump, because if Washington, D.C. goes for Trump, that's an indicator that Biden is in serious trouble nationally.
Yes.
It's like if Danny gets arrested and I tell the police, oh yeah, Danny did it, I'm sure he did, that puts him in some trouble. But if Danny's mom says, oh yes, my dear boy did that, he's in real trouble. So these things aren't all independent, right? So if a state that we think is really pro-Biden goes Trump, it's not just their electoral votes, it's an indicator of a national thing.
Yeah, and if I can actually hijack one piece real quick, we just basically got New York Times is now projecting Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. And let's see if I can realign these a little bit.
It's only 619. Aren't the polls still open?
Oh, yes. They only have a few percentage points, and it's a little, don't worry. But they do have a range of estimates, Doug, so you cannot call them out. But to your exact point right there, Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina, if any one of these 3 go to Biden because of kind of the things you described there, that's going to be a very good night for Biden. Right now, Florida is leaning towards Trump at 78%, and these things are going all over. It is so early. These things are going to wiggle around all night, but I put them down there so you have something to look at besides my face, regardless of how Doug described it. It's a coin flip in Georgia, and it's tilting Biden in North Carolina. So that'll be a little bit, sorry, those results literally just popped up for the first time. So
that's the point. That's what we're here for, man.
Yeah.
I found out a piece of trivia that I had no idea. Why are elections on Tuesdays?
Why?
This sounds like it's the open of a riddle, but it's not.
Yeah.
In the old day for the farmers, and the idea was it was to give the farmers time to go to church on Sunday, 1 day of travel, then they can vote on Tuesday and be in the city in time for the farmers market on Wednesday, and then go back home on Thursday.
Beautiful.
So they could go to church and also attend the farmers market.
And that seems representative of what was important back then for sure.
I also learned why it's always the same Tuesday, because it used to be any Tuesday was fine. Anywhere in November, December, it was fine as long as it was a Tuesday. Then the telegraph got invented. And so one state would have their election on one Tuesday and then telegraph the results to all the other states, and that would affect the voting.
Oh, yeah.
So then they made a national election day.
Love it.
Yeah, when I was doing my research for my teaching, I learned all this election stuff.
Yeah. How has your class been, by the way? I know because politics is something I deal with this a lot, and trying to analyze an election and try to zoom in on, how mathematics apply to these things. Have you had any issues, or have your students, you think, been pretty able to kind of separate the math from the policies and kind of analyze each independently?
I just tried really hard not to make my politics into it. Now, in terms of misunderstanding poll results, everybody misunderstands poll results. So it isn't like one news source is worse than the other as far as that. Some news organizations might have skewed polls, like this poll is BS because they're lying, but that's not really where I'm going at. The way I talk to them is, if you lie with statistics, you're an amateur. If you're a pro, you don't need to lie to make your statistics do what you need them to.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. I can't tell you the number of times where I saw Biden now leading by X points according to new poll in whatever state. And to your point, it's just like, these are not, stop it. I wish we were a little better. But hopefully, and the feedback I can tell you from the chat has been marvelous about people thought your explanation was great. So the wonderful instant feedback of the internet. People
great.
did really enjoy it.
Now, why 95%? Here's your trade-off.
Yeah.
The more certain you are, the bigger that interval is. So if you take the margin of error and multiply it by 1.5, okay, like you're tipping, right? You take the margin of error, you multiply it by 1.5, and then add and subtract that, then you're at 99.7% certainty, but the interval is big enough to be useless. So the more sure you want to be, the less precise your prediction.
Gotcha.
Right? So it's like the old joke that some people are lost in a helium balloon and they see a guy on the ground and they go, "Where are we?" And he goes, "You're in a balloon." And he goes, "But where are we physically?" "You're lost." And they say, "Well, that was a mathematician because everything he said was true and useless." So yes. The more certainty you want, the less useful your result is. And so 95% is kind of the compromise that we've established, that if you're 95% sure, you still get a range narrow enough to tell you something.
Sure. And a little bit of how that plays in, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but can you talk a little bit about how sample size plays into that and whether you have 5,000 people?
I live in the rabbit hole, man. Yeah, there's a formula for margin of error that involves the sample size. What's surprising is if you could get a truly random sample, you can get great accuracy by just like 50 people. And it's independent of the size of the big population. So if you pick 50 people at random in the entire planet and ask them a question, and if they're completely random, you're going to get a good answer. The problem is you can't pick people at random.
Humans are really bad at it.
It's really hard to pick people at random because then you wind up talking to a baby, right? So, so then and of course for election prediction, what we want is likely voters. Now, who's a likely voter? That was one of the problems in 2016.
Yes.
The people who they thought were likely voters were not necessarily the people who actually voted. More people voted that were not counted as likely voters.
Right.
And now, outside of the realm of math, when you're talking about who is and isn't a likely voter.
Yeah. And I know one of the other things is even if you could pick people at random, what are the exact odds, going back to our exit polling a little bit, what are the odds that person is going to talk to you, feel comfortable, and tell you the truth? That introduces, for everyone kind of listening in 2016, they found a huge discrepancy was with education. They found that there was a misrepresented sample among white college-educated voters and white non-college-educated voters, and they did not exactly figure out what that ratio should be and what was representative, and that's one of the ways that the polling was off. And actually, I don't know if we talked about this, Doug, in the pre-interview, but in your opinion, pure opinion here, did you have did you think that polls were off in 2016 or that they were incorrect?
The polls were not incorrect, but the interpretation was, and it was like the margin of error thing.
Yes.
And then again, these things are all linked.
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't like, well, we got it wrong in Ohio, but we're okay in Pennsylvania. No, because it's just like if Washington, D.C. turns out red, even though it's through electoral, it's an indicator of the whole thing. So yeah, they miss. Now they're better this time because last time there were a lot of undecided people.
Yes, a huge percentage.
This time there's not. In fact, I don't remember the number, but a shockingly high percentage of people voting today and the last week knew who they were going to vote for 4 years ago.
Woo.
4 years ago, they already knew, okay, I know who I'm voting for in 4 years.
It's a little bit of that polarization. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the world that we're in.
People are easier to predict.
Yeah. Well, Doug, we're just about at the end of time. Again, everyone has loved all of Doug's math lessons. I want to give you a chance. I'll pull it up on screen once I kind of hang up with you here. But about your book, Social Nonsense. It's a beautiful thing.
It is. It wasn't written for COVID, but man, if you are stuck on Zoom chats with people or with people in your house and you're driving each other nuts, it's collaborative creativity. It is fun, creative writing, drawing, and storytelling games you can play with your friends. And collaborative creativity is a way to tap in. There's a whole Zen thing going on that's under the surface that I try not to make too big of a deal of in the book, but it's there. It is a way that you can tap into a group mind and come up with beautiful, creative things that you would not have that nobody would have come up with by themselves. And it's really entertainingly written.
Do you have an age range that this applies to? Because this is one of my favorite things in hearing about your writing process with it.
You have to be able to draw. On the young end, you don't have to even be able to write, but you have to be able to draw a picture for the drawing games. For the writing games, you obviously have to write, which, however old that is. And the storytelling stuff, even little kids like to tell stories.
Gotcha.
So, yes,
do you actually put a specific range, or is it pretty general, kind of your kids and you'll know if they'll be able to do some of these?
I used to, pre-COVID, I was going to libraries and people would bring little kids and they would participate. They can't participate in the writing games, but they can do drawing list storytelling.
Gotcha. And
I've been doing this for years. I go to restaurants, so I always have a legal pad with me when I go to restaurants, and my friends just know after we order and before the food comes, we're going to create something beautiful and funny, and then we'll go back to conversation.
Is this something you use with your family as well?
Oh yeah, all the time. This stuff is great.
Awesome. All right. Well, I can't wait. I'll pull it up on screen here once I do another little tech switch.
Available on Amazon or socialnonsense.org. Okay, sorry.
No worries. I'll of course show all the links and things. But Doug, thank you so much for joining me. My first guest, couldn't have asked for anyone better. And a great tee up for the whole night.
Okay, catch you later.
All right, thanks. Bye, Doug.
Bye.
All right, we're coming back real quick. All right. Woo! That was Doug, everybody. Doug is great. He's wonderful. He's one of my favorite people. There's presidential races. It's going to take me a bit to kind of reformulate. Let me pull up here for a little better view. This is what we will probably keep most of our eye on. So you can see Florida right now is looking about 84% Trump. Now, I've pinned a lot of hopes on Florida. I want to let you know something about Florida. In 2018, in the midterms, Florida came through, and all of a sudden it looked like it was going to be a disaster for Democrats because it went more Republican than what anyone thought. So, breathe a little bit. We're okay. I guess you can't really see North Carolina. It's 65% Biden currently. Remember, if all of these go for Trump, then we kind of have a somewhat competitive race. If one of these go for Democrats, we're okay. Now, again, Florida's got 58%. Georgia, North Carolina, I would almost ignore. These ranges are super wide right now, so we can kind of take it easy. So we will figure out where these are at. Maybe I missed this, but how accurate are these graphs you're showing? No, it might not be good data until much later, but are they just misleading? This is always wait, hold back. You can see Florida is starting. You can see this range closing. So it gives you kind of like a range of what the expected outcome is. For example, in Georgia, Biden +8 to Trump +9 doesn't really tell you much of anything. So again, this is figuring out based on their turnout models, their specific demographics of the counties that are reporting. So that'll be okay. Sorry, Mary, for telling you what to do. So coming up next, we will have Jackie Pearson. She is absolutely wonderful, but I'll save a little bit more of an introduction, and we'll jump right into our next segment. This will be a bit more. We're going to go down the rabbit hole of kind of some particular issues and things that she's experienced, her story, a great personal testament to kind of what is at stake in elections. So again, one more time, I'm going to do a quick little tech switch. I have to get a phone up. I have to dial in. I have to let the person in. But I really appreciate you guys hanging out so far. The view count is better than I could have expected. And, we'll hang out, and I'll be right back, and we'll bring in Jackie, and we'll talk some more. So I will be right back, you guys. Thanks. And I'll make sure to mute my mic this time. Okay, everybody, we're back. Want to make sure everything's cool. Make sure the audio works this time. My next guest, I'm really excited. This is a person I sought out after seeing a lot of her advocacy on Facebook for things that maybe a lot of us take for granted. Jackie Pearson, she is a patient advocate who lives in Waterloo, Iowa. She's been battling with Crohn's disease. We'll talk a lot about that and what it means. And she's been speaking out against the high cost of prescription drugs, something that I think everyone has heard about. But I thought it was really important to kind of put a face to a name, and maybe you don't have somebody in life that's going through quite this exact same thing, although you probably do, and maybe you just don't know because it's not something they talk about publicly. So I would like to give a huge warm welcome to Jackie Pearson. Hey, Jackie.
Hi, Danny.
So can you give us just a big kind of overview of why you call yourself a patient advocate and kind of how you got started down that road.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, a friend introduced me to Patients for Affordable Drugs. And through that organization, I learned a lot about big pharma that I, didn't know previously. And around that same time, with my Crohn's disease, I started needing to take a biologic. The biologic that I take costs an upwards of $23,000 per shot, and I take one shot a month. So this was the first time in my life where I was facing taking a drug and needing this drug where if I lost my health insurance, I couldn't pay for the medicine that I needed. And this was the first time in my life that I had been facing this. I mean, being a sick person isn't cheap. I already knew that, but this was the first time where this was a reality for me. And I know that there are others who are a lot less fortunate than I am, that are in worse situations than I am. And I just really felt like I couldn't stay quiet about it anymore, that I needed to start using my voice. And so through Patients for Affordable Drugs, who have been great, and they've believed in what I've had to say, and they've been a great platform for me. So that was kind of how it all started.
Yeah, and we talked about this kind of in our pre-interview, but can you share a little bit about just what the drug itself, what it allows you to do? I know some people may think it's more of maybe it's just a comfort thing. What does it manage? Like, what does it enable you to do?
So for those that don't know, Crohn's disease is an autoimmune condition. There's currently no cure, and I will have this for life unless a cure comes out in our lifetime. Basically, my immune system attacks my GI tract. So to keep my immune system calm, I take a biologic called Stelara, and it suppresses my immune system. And without this drug, my disease would likely flare, and a flare looks different for different people. But for me in the past, it usually means extreme weight loss, extreme abdominal pain, blood loss, high fevers. Sometimes, it can end in a hospitalization. So basically, without my drug, I can't function. I can't work. I can't keep my insurance that I need to get this drug to function. It's just kind of a whole circle. So without this medication, I'm not a functioning human. That's basically how I would put it.
Gotcha. And so in that, can you talk a little bit about what it's like right now with, okay, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of kind of some economic collapse. Hopefully the worst of it is behind us. But, as we all know, health insurance is tied to your employer, and sometimes that isn't even a stable thing in the middle of a pandemic. So what's that like? Because you did say that it's a immune system suppressant, so obviously this whole COVID thing may affect you a little bit differently. Can you talk just a little bit about what it's like living kind of with that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been stressful. It's been anxiety inducing. My husband and I have been lucky that both of our jobs are stable, and we've been able to work from home. Both of our jobs, I'm a graphic designer, so I've been able to easily work from home. And he has as well. So, we've been able to keep our health insurance, and that's extremely important, especially for me. But it's still stressful because if one of us or both of us were to, lose our employment, especially both of us, because then I wouldn't have him as a fallback insurance wise. And that would be honestly devastating for my health. And then as far as I'm slightly higher risk since, I have an autoimmune disease and I do take a immunosuppressive drug. So I've been trying to just, stay home as much as possible, work at home. It has been the funnest year, 2020, but we're getting by.
I think all of us kind of feel that same way. And can you talk a little bit about policy, particularly the Affordable Care Act? And there's been a lot of people, a lot of talk back and forth about whether to repeal it or not. But how does the Affordable Care Act kind of help you personally?
Yeah, so the Affordable Care Act, all of that passed around when I would have been graduating from college. And that was 2011. And the week I graduated from college, I was actually hospitalized. I was very sick. And that's when I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. So the Affordable Care Act was extremely important for me for a number of reasons because one, I was under the age of 26, so I was still on my dad's employer's insurance, which covered me while I was going through this health crisis. And for two, I accepted a job a few weeks later, and I now was a fresh college graduate with a pre-existing condition going into her first job. And these protections from the ACA allowed me to get onto that employer's insurance, which I'm still on to this day. So yeah, the pre-existing conditions protection have been a huge thing for patients like me as far as being able to access the healthcare we need and keep our insurance.
Sure. And we did talk a little bit, just because you know, have insurance is not like a one perfect solution to like now you're covered. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you get to handle things with versus like other people, you know, with co-pays, with how these things kind of work? Does everyone pay $20,000? And kind of your journey to get to the point where you're at, where you know, you're somewhat managing everything and kind of at a more stable point.
Yeah, so copays can change. They can vary from insurance to insurance. What drugs your insurance will even cover varies from insurance to insurance. So like right now, the drug I'm on, I have a $250 copay, which is pretty high. I know people's insurance that it's even higher. You can have $1,000 copays, especially on a drug as expensive as mine. So like I said, mine's $250. And then I have a copay assist card, which I actually get through the drugs manufacturer, that brings the cost of my drug down to $5. So I'm fortunate that I have good insurance and then I have this drug card available to me, but someone is still paying that $20,000+ and it's my insurance company. So drug manufacturers love to put out these copay assist cards because, I mean, why wouldn't they want to foot your couple $100 measly bill if it means they're still getting their $20K? They're just getting it from your insurance company. So, but like we talked about previously, if I lose my insurance, I would have to come up with $23,000 a month, and that's not happening. So, yeah.
Can you talk about a little bit your journey to kind of finding the drug? Because this was not like, oh, you have Crohn's disease, here's the one cure for that. You know, congrats, now you take this and you're fine.
Yeah, so for the first 5 years, I actually stayed in remission on a pill that is pretty affordable in the scope of IBD medications. From there, I moved on to Humira, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. It's all over the TV with their advertisements. Those are about $5K per shot. You take those every other week. So cheaper in comparison to Stelara, but still extremely expensive. And with my insurance, I actually failed Humira. I was allergic to it. And I had to fail Humira before I ever would have been allowed to take Stelara that I take now. And that's an issue a lot of people run into on insurance. It's like a fail first or step therapy where your insurance company wants you to try the least expensive options before you work up to the more expensive one, even if your doctor believes that higher cost option is what you need, is what's right for you. So it doesn't matter what your doctor thinks. In some cases, it's all about what your insurance thinks.
So it's no regard for, is this the best healthcare for the patient? This is well, that's expensive, so let's make sure that these other things don't solve your health issues, and then we can move on.
Yeah, sometimes, none of those cheaper options. I mean, you might exhaust all of them and they don't work. I mean, sometimes you might get lucky and one of them does, but I mean, you could be, wasting a lot of time in that process.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you talk a little bit about the timeline for some of these things? Because it's not like, a pill you try for a week and then that didn't work, so you move on. What the schedule for some of those things can be.
So a lot of these therapies, I mean, I'm not an expert on all of them, but like Stelara can take weeks, if not months, to go into effect before you notice a difference. So if you're waiting, on each of these weeks or months to know if they're going to work for you, that entire time your condition might be deteriorating, depending on what your condition or what your disease is. yeah, and there's just a lot of trial and error. Some work, some don't. Um, yeah, so it's definitely not the best practice or the funnest thing. So
For sure.
yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about Patients for Affordable Drugs and kind of what you aim to do through that organization?
Yeah, so Patients for Affordable Drugs, they are just out there giving you all the facts on big pharma, all the truth, and then highlighting patient stories like me, people all across the United States that are dealing with the high cost of prescription drugs, that have that constant worry over their head about whether or not they can afford to stay alive, as I like to say. Um, and they're just a great organization, a great platform that brings all these voices, gives them a place to speak, brings their voices to the table so that they're heard, these stories are heard. I was in a campaign ad for them that ran across the state of Iowa during election season, and um, because of them, I hope that people saw that and it maybe influenced their decisions today or when they cast their vote. And yeah, they work really hard to get the facts out there and to get the patient story out there.
Yeah, and you actually had the opportunity to go meet with some legislators and just kind of talk.
Yeah.
Can you give us insight into things you learned, things that maybe biases or things that were confirmed or things? I mean, what was that whole experience like? Because very few of us ever get to go
Yeah.
get into the meat of it and really see how it all works. So what was that
Yeah.
like?
I mean, it was an experience I never thought that I would get the opportunity to take. So, um, but yeah, prior to COVID, that's something else that they do. They bring out patient advocates from across the country to DC to meet face to face with legislators from your own state. So, for example, I met with Senator Grassley, Congresswoman Finkenauer's team, and then Senator Ernst's team. So Grassley was the only one that we met with face to face in his actual Senate office. Surprisingly, all of the meetings went really well. I felt heard in all of them. My husband Drew, who came with, he felt heard. It was good conversations. I mean, for the most part, surface level healthcare, prescription drugs, everybody across both sides of the aisle, bipartisan, seems to be on board that something needs to change. I feel like actions backing up the words tends to be more on the Democratic side, from what I've witnessed so far. But I mean, the meetings all went better than I even expected. I mean, we were heard. People asked, important questions. So overall, it was a really great experience. I was glad I got to share my story in DC, and
Yeah,
I
get to
mean,
be all fancy.
that they bring people out to do this, and just these face-to-face meetings are so important.
Absolutely. And what was it like? I mean, obviously, you kind of voiced your support for one party over another, but what was it like to meet, say, somebody with Senator Grassley, somebody, whether you would or would not vote for them, but, everyone's got a party. So there's just some more baggage there. What was it like to talk to somebody that you may or may not think that they are on your team in a certain way? How did that go?
He was probably, I feel like, our best meeting. He is actually, I have the name of the bill down, legislation. He is kind of heading the Prescription Drug Price Reduction Act, him and another senator. So we talked a lot about that in our meeting with him, and he's very on board with getting, the cost of prescription drugs to an affordable place. So he was really enthusiastic about having that conversation with us, having fellow Iowans, in DC. So although I don't maybe wouldn't necessarily agree with some of the his policies, and but in regards to this particular issue, I think we were on the same page, which was nice.
Yeah, I'm sure that's pretty great. And just kind of to wrap up, how can you describe your feelings today, knowing the election? One of the things I'm trying to do on the stream is to connect a little bit of, hey, there's this big, grand, giant election, but it also affects people on a more personal level. How would you describe your feelings today? Just knowing we'll get some answers one way or the other today, or maybe in a couple weeks. But what's it
Yeah,
like?
I've been anxious all day, anxiously awaiting what the results are going to be, because just as a an American with a pre-existing condition, um, I'm nervous what's going to happen in the weeks or months to come, and I think one candidate will be better for my interest than the other. And yeah, I'm anxious to see what the results are going to be, because I know for myself and a lot of my patient friends, it's so important. Our pre-existing condition, can protections, and so I know all my patient friends are nervously awaiting as well to hear this outcome. But yeah,
Anxious
anxiety.
just like the rest of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess then to wrap up, is there anything that you would like to tell viewers, the few dozen that we have? How can they kind of either help, or anything you want to call attention to, or say, hey, pay attention to this, or think about this when you're voting, or anything like that? Any message that you kind of want to put out there? I know you're not speaking on behalf of all pre-existing condition people,
Yeah.
but at least as far as your message personally.
I mean, I guess if you haven't already cast your vote, or if you're waiting in line right now, or if you're going to go cast your vote before the polls close, if you don't have someone in your life that's affected by a pre-existing condition or the high costs of, prescription drugs, or if you're not, to think about that population, that part of the population, when you're casting your vote. Sometimes when you don't have a loved one in your life impacted, or it doesn't impact you yourself, you don't even think about it. But I mean, we're all honestly one diagnosis away from potentially being in that category, from having a pre-existing condition, especially with COVID now. I think for some people, the impact of that virus could, last for years, and now suddenly you have a pre-existing condition as well. So, I mean, it can affect any of us at any time.
Sure. All right. Well, Jackie, I want to thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your story. One thing I want to highlight, if I can shower you with a bit of praise, is, as you mentioned many times tonight and also in our pre-interview, that you feel so lucky and feel so privileged. And I think that's just a great testament to your outlook on life, and also just a reminder for all of us that everyone's dealing with a little something, but the fact that you're still thinking about others who are not as fortunate, who are sharing your kind of diagnosis, is a very admirable thing. So I want to thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully we can be a little less anxious when we go to bed tonight.
Yeah, that would be nice. Thanks, Danny.
Yeah, have a good night.
You too.
Hello. All right, so I got to admit, I have not been keeping up with all of the latest election things, because part of my job is I really want to give full time and attention, of course, to these people who are being so great to speak with us. We're seeing a couple different things. A couple more states have been called. I don't think we have any major surprises. Again, this is one thing. If you take a look at this map, it's slightly different than what we were just looking at. So I want to call attention to a couple of things here. Let me bring this over. Make sure my screens are right. Sorry for a couple screen issues and things. I'm trying to juggle everything. Luckily, Mary's popping down, so if you see me looking over here and giving her a thumbs up or a nod, she's being very sweet and helping me jump in. So here, if we look, again, this is projecting right now. Florida, very likely for Trump. Right now, this is just as the votes are cast. It is showing a slightly blue Florida. The nowcast, this tends to be a better view. This is where we get into the confusing pieces of the night that, oh, why is this blue? But this is saying it's definitely going to go to Trump. Again, this is getting into, okay, here's the 81%. They know where these things are coming from, and basically they expect the remainder of the vote to be much further red. So we can go ahead and kind of, I think, put Florida in the Donald Trump category for tonight. We still, even if we have North Carolina, I'll go ahead and bring up, I hope it's the right one. It is not the right interactive. Is it here? No. Okay. Hang on just a sec. We're gonna get the interactive going here. So this is kind of ways to look at the race. So again, if we call Florida for Trump, it certainly ups his chances, but it kind of depends. So again, the other two being Georgia. Again, let's say if that's red there as well. If Joe Biden wins North Carolina, all of a sudden, the race looks a lot different. This is a case where I was trying to make this into a football analogy. Your team's down by 21 and your offense feels like they can score a lot. You need a lot of things to go right in a row. You need to score, onside kick, score, onside kick, score. And even if you get 80% of the way there, but one thing goes wrong, everything can kind of fall apart. So that's kind of the state that Trump is in. In this case, it basically has to start really pushing in his direction and can't stop. If there is any basically outcome that goes against him, can be a little rough. So we will kind of keep an eye on that. I have some music going in the background. If that's annoying or not, I thought it's something to fill the space so you don't just hear me talking the whole time. So right now, Virginia and Vermont have been called. These are not very, not surprising results. Again, if we look at where they are at on this good old snake chart, Virginia was a good ways down here. So relatively good that it was called early, but still well short of like 270. Margins are going to start being important. Did Joe Biden win by the 12-point margin that was projected, or did he win by 3 points? Not something that we necessarily know right now, but something that we will figure out as we go along. And to let you know, we do have kind of a break in the interviews, so we're just going to kind of be hanging out live here. Now it's time for any kind of questions or things. And then we're going to go ahead and bring in Mary at 7:30 and Sarah Trone-Garriott at 8 to check in on how her race is going. So in the meantime, this will be a little bit not as rapid fire, I guess, with information and things. Checking in on chat here and there. So far, so good. I know there's some discussion. I'm not going to dive too deep into the discussion happening, knowing all the different things. So what we know so far, I'm going to pull up the basically the live coverage, and we'll kind of see if there's anything key here. I'm going to be kind of just reading this live. Again, I unfortunately am not able to give reasonable interviews and then also kind of figure things out. Nate Silver is somebody who I really like to follow. So it looks like Biden is outperforming Clinton among some demographic groups in Florida, but it's not enough to offset his underperformance among Hispanics. So these are the kind of things that start drawing into other states. You can start making some assumptions there. Can you talk about your desk chair briefly? Looks comfy, in the market for a new desk chair. This is a DX Racer. There's like a billion more like it. At the time I bought it, it was kind of the only brand that had them. Highly recommend a good gaming chair. This one didn't have like any crazy colors on it. Gray and black are A-okay. But yes, go into the market and just, read reviews. The Senate race in Iowa, of course, we don't have any results yet, but the Senate race in Iowa is going to be bananas. I don't think that we're going to have any results tonight for that. I expect that race to be very, very close and maybe court battle-y potentially. It depends on how things break. Maybe it breaks like 4 points in one direction and it's a clear win, but it has been one of the most closely polled races in all of the nation. So I think it's the number one closest Senate race. So we won't know. We're going to have to wait till polls close down, and then we're going to kind of try to figure that out. See if there's anything new. There's a couple of these. A lot of these wins are for House seats, which is a little rough. If Trump won the popular vote but lost the election through the Electoral College, do you think Republicans would stop supporting it so staunchly? That's tough because according to most projections, in about 70% of the cases where Trump wins the election tonight, he loses the Electoral College. So it's a very thin margin that would happen. The opposite is basically a 0% chance likelihood, just with the way that the states fall. If you think about it conceptually, so a pure election or a pure popular vote model we'll put on one side and we'll make Electoral College on the other. So the pure popular vote is the one person, one vote, everybody's counted the same. When you view that collectively, it can start to seem a little unfair because places like California and New York that have the most people seem overweighted in that scenario. On the other end, you have kind of the Electoral College, and if you think about that collectively, it helps balance and make things a little even. But if you go down to the individual level, you're literally kind of you can't just like give power to one group without taking it from another. So you're actually making the votes in California and New York less impactful, and giving that power to more rural states. It's an important thing to keep in mind. I don't necessarily think that the popular vote model is like necessarily the best thing that we can do, because there is a big difference between if you think get parties out of it a little bit, but say you have more urban issues and more rural issues. If urban just has more people, that becomes kind of the only thing that's important, and then rural America can be kind of left behind, which is a little tough. So there's no like perfect answer. I don't know what Republicans would think. If Joe Biden wins the popular vote, Democrats will have won 7 out of the last 8 popular votes. It's just kind of one of the things we have going on in the country. I think these are important. The kind of final forecasts for a whole bunch of races. You can see final forecasts. This is not like as of right now forecast. This is kind of going into the night what the forecast would say. The big headline event here is Pennsylvania. Let me make sure I scroll down so you can see that. Pennsylvania at a +5 and an 84% chance to win. Again, if we go back to kind of our big map here, this is part of it. So say if North Carolina ends up going red, if Biden wins Pennsylvania, all of a sudden his chances are up to 90% again. You can see how many iterations there is of one state all of a sudden swinging it massively for Joe Biden. Those are the things to kind of keep in mind. Arizona's another one. Again, if that goes blue, you'll see his chances shoot up by a good bit once it kind of goes through. So again, that's 75. And Arizona is a relatively small state, only 11 electoral votes. Florida scaring you right now. I think Florida, if we believe this guy right here, Florida will go for Trump. We had 83%. A good thing to keep in mind here is the percentage vote. So Florida's feels more solid. You can see how much more narrow that interval is. You can see the 12 and 16. So it looks like Republicans right now will definitively outperform 2016 estimates in Florida. For Joe Biden viewers, that's not exactly what you would like to see, but the race is a good ways off yet, so we'll kind of see. I like that they do put the previous marks in there, but you can see the range of estimates now exists to the right of the 2016 outcome. For Georgia, 10%, you can see this is a super wide range. Definitely leading Trump, but only 10% reported, so plenty more to go there. This will tighten, but it does not tighten equally on both sides. So there's still a reasonable chance in Georgia for Joe Biden. In North Carolina, this is a super wide range. I would not give this a whole lot. You can see a whole bunch. Mitch McConnell, a lot of people had spoken about him potentially losing his seat. Not necessarily something that I believed would happen, but he is now declared as the winner. I'm going to go ahead and see Tennessee had a Republican win the Senate seat. No big deal. Governor race. I'm looking through for any major ones that I can see, things that I had my eye on. Cory Booker won again. I don't think that that's a big deal. Joe Biden wins Rhode Island. They're projecting Biden wins in New Jersey, Massachusetts, Maryland, Donald Trump, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama. None of these are particularly surprising. South Carolina, I think, was moderately close to the middle. No, it wasn't. My bad. South Carolina. Okay, it was like kind of reasonable, but pretty far. That was a 90% favored to Trump. Ohio, at this point, do you think that goes for Biden or Trump? Based on what I have seen, that looks more and more like it will go for Trump. Again, this deals with some of the correlations here. So let's just kind of go with what we know. We'll start it on just Florida. But given that Florida has gone red because of the demographic shifts, that kind of means Trump has about an 80% chance to win Ohio. So that could go pretty heavily in his favor. It kind of depends if Democrats are able to pick up a couple of other places. Given that, then it starts to kind of come back a little bit, but it definitely depends. So we're dealing with a lot of different scenarios, a lot of things that can go in a variety of directions. So right now, we are still in the wide world of anything is possible. Winning Florida, I would say, it's definitively a good thing for Trump. That I don't want to say this is now Trump's race to lose or anything. He's still certainly got a long way to go, but that was kind of step one of the plan. Again, if you follow the football analogy I brought up earlier, they scored the first touchdown. Now they're going for an onside kick. So good that they did the first step, but a long ways to go, admittedly, for them. And if any one of these things go wrong, the race can be kind of pulled in a different direction. So we'll have to kind of wait and see. We're at a little bit of a lull. It appears that they haven't called Florida yet, to my knowledge, at least in what I am looking at. I don't think we've seen anything definitively here. So, good point. Little things like Virginia being called just means that there was a very big swing there, so it was able to be called early. So Florida not yet being called, that basically means that for ABC News specifically, they will not call any race until it is 99.5%. Or basically 199 out of 200 chance that a particular person wins. So we are still not calling things, and that's very important. It doesn't matter who is leading in certain areas. We kind of have to wait for things to settle and be called officially. Oh, I know some people's eyes lit up when they saw Texas blue. Again, chill, hang out. We got a long way to go. You never know which one's going to be leading. So we have kind of Ohio and Texas. Some of these I'll kind of have to check in to see if we're going to get results. As it's looking right now, basically Biden being called tonight hinges, it appears, on North Carolina, assuming that Georgia is going to fulfill the 78% chance, which, let's be honest, 22% chance is nothing to scoff at either. So that's roughly 1 in 5 or 1 in 5. Yeah, I was correct on my math there. Or North Carolina. So we'll have to kind of wait and check those out. So looking through chat, seeing, do you think ranked choice voting will ever become a thing in the next 10, 20 years? Boy, I sure hope so. I don't know many people, once you kind of understand what ranked choice voting is and what it can lead to, I don't know many people that are opposed to it. I think that is a true establishment is more against that, because one thing that I think Democrats and Republicans would like to agree on is that they like that power is centralized in those two parties, and therefore it is in their best interest to both fight for that, even if they may go back and forth. This is kind of enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. They both don't want to lose the power that they have, so I'm not sure. I think there's going to have to be a pretty strong push for ranked choice voting. I think it'll follow like everything else, where you'll have one or two states that are willing to try it, willing to pass it. It'll take a while to catch on, and then maybe once more people start to see the advantages, and it'll have to, swing an election or something. We'll have to wait and see. So yeah. Cool. So we have about 20 minutes to hang out to see a whole bunch more live coverage. Again, Nate Silver is kind of the one that I like to see. He is the head. I've listened to him talk a lot. So often, one of the reasons I like seeing his comments is I kind of know the lens in which he views things. So hopefully I can translate a little bit. It's a little hard to make what to make of Ohio. Biden is ahead, but that's based on absentee votes, which are expected to be good for him. Counties that the New York Times says are more fully reported also look good for Biden relative to 2016, but nothing is more than 84% in so far. So, good to know. But again, this is kind of Nate saying, hey, things may look good, but they're still 16%, and maybe they all pushed it in a direction. I must have missed what you said earlier. Did you say you think the election will go to Biden but won't be declared tonight? I don't think that we are out of... I think that's still a possibility. Let's put it a lot easier. That's still a possibility based on what I've seen. Mostly it hinges on North Carolina. If North Carolina, I think, the kind of header, if I can find the right one, lays it out. If Joe Biden wins one, he's likely to win. If President Trump wins all three, it could be days or more before a winner is declared. So, obviously, everyone in the Biden camp is hoping that North Carolina or Georgia, there's still a chance here, that it will swing over to Democrats. And again, I really want to put this out there. Florida, for example, in 2018, actually single-handedly swung a whole bunch of models that were trying to predict the race live, including the New York Times. I remember sitting in my apartment. I think I was with Max McNett and Matthew Gall. We were having a good drink, some whiskey, some rum, sipping and watching the results come in. And Florida came in wildly Republican, way more than the results had kind of said that it would, or what people guessed. And then all of a sudden that kind of threw a lot of other things into chaos. And then the rest of the night basically went well for Democrats. So I don't want everybody to look at Florida and think, oh, this is the canary in the coal mine. This is the leader. Everything's going to go more for Trump. This is the exact situation we were in last time, where Florida went very heavily for Trump, more than predictions. And I would say right now, this is not heavily going for Trump. 3 points is pretty far within. There was a lot of polling that put that within the margin of error. So as we learned from Doug, that can still be a reasonable outcome. So we are figuring some things out, but while things are correlated between states, they are not always perfectly correlated. Biden is getting the margin statewide that his campaign hoped for in Florida. It's that very bad Miami-Dade County return that swung the state towards Trump. So, again, people with some more in-depth county-by-county analysis there. Apart from that, I don't think there's anything super major that's going on. Some people are focusing on, this is that Miami-Dade, that was the that county that was actually just referenced. So I don't think it's a very good chart because I can't look at it and immediately know what's going on with it. Goodness gracious, that's a lot of House races. So I kind of skipped over those before. We'll kind of take a look, see how things are going. if you have questions, feel free to sling them in the chat. I'm going to kind of try to do some reading and not talk for literally the entire time. What are you thinking for Pennsylvania? It's still wide open, up in the air. Again, I try not to get too excited about any sort of initial polls or exit polls, those sorts of things. Pennsylvania, we're going to have to wait and see. I wonder if they've even chatted about it. Whoops, that is the wrong window there. Let's not take down the broadcast. So Pennsylvania, I mean, this was the initial... I should say the initial forecast. Florida, we can see if it holds, will be Trump +3. So Pennsylvania, there's up to a 5-point swing that could occur there. I don't think they focused on a whole lot. Pennsylvania is likely the tipping state, but I don't think that we are going to get good. I doubt that we'll get good definitive results on Pennsylvania tonight. Thanks for the analysis. Well, thank you for hanging out. I know that there's a... We live in the attention economy, and so I'm very thankful that all of you are kind of choosing to hang out, spend it here with me as I kind of ramble through these events and we figure out. And Pennsylvania may not matter is true. It is the most likely tipping point state at this point. Tipping point state is a relatively new term. People have heard this term swing state a lot. Swing states don't always matter in elections. For example, Iowa is definitely a swing state, but we are likely not going to be a really important state. If we're winning for Trump, we're part of a big base kind of that he has going in. If we go for Biden, it's like, oh my God, Biden won so many states all the way up to Iowa that we're kind of just like icing on the cake. It's not like Biden needs Iowa to get... to that 270 mark. So, like, Iowa, realistically, while it may go either way, doesn't really matter too much as I hate to say it. We're not that important this year, but our Senate race absolutely is. Thank you, Brittany. Appreciate it. Mr. Shepard, didn't one state try to do that? I believe so. I don't know if they were successful. I can't recall off the top of my head whether or not they did. So if you haven't studied this snake chart, this has also tipping points. We can segue right into that. So this is Pennsylvania. So Florida is no longer a tipping point state for Biden. Could be for Trump. We'll kind of have to wait and see. The tipping point state is basically if you line these things up instead of by the projected margin, but by the actual margin of how things turned out, what is the state that crosses this 270 electoral vote line? That is what is known as the tipping point state, and that will be basically where the winner is truly determined. Again, we can project a lot of things tonight. So again, we've been going back and saying, like, if North Carolina does go, and everyone groans as you see that lean more to the right. Now Trump at a +5 in Georgia. If North Carolina is called for Biden tonight, enough states likely won't be called tonight that say, okay, Joe Biden definitely has 270 electoral votes. But we kind of know that it's pretty likely that he's going to win anyway. So there's a little bit of the projection and then what we can actually call. So we'll kind of wait and see. I'm surprised that I have not seen Florida pop up yet. On my other monitor here, I'm going to take a look at ABC News. I listened to their elections head guy talk about kind of how they were going to handle things. So I'm interested in figuring out what they have called and what they have not. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this over. I think this is a great view. So right now, this is only things that are like basically, as I said, 99.5% chance of happening. Oklahoma, Tennessee, nothing here is particularly surprising thus far. None of these were considered major swing states. You can see where they are grade results. They are counting the results, so we'll wait and see. I know Florida is a big thing. Again, don't read into that Trump margin or the Biden margin. Either one. Is Biden still leading? Yeah, in Texas. Even with 32%, and even though he's up by 9 points, that does not, don't jump to any conclusions. We don't know the demographic makeup of that. So as you're kind of mousing around trying to figure out, where are these things at? Still okay. We're just going to wait for a lot of the, I guess, the experts with all their statistical models, the things that I do not have at my disposal. We're going to wait for them to figure some things out. So with a few minutes, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to run, grab something to eat real quick. Since we're in a little bit of a lull, we'll prepare for our interview with Mary, of course. She's going to come on. It's going to be my favorite interview. I'm super biased, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. But that'll be wonderful. And then immediately following, we'll have State Senate candidate Sarah Trone Garriott, who is the Iowa State Senate candidate in my area, to see how she's feeling. I'm almost sure that she has been phone banking all night and doing everything possible to try to win. She's facing a Republican seat that she's trying to turn Democratic, so that'll be very, very interesting. And then we get to check in again. So I'm going to take a quick breather. Oh, yeah. Dude, this is my second one of these that I'm already on. So trying to chug the water, trying to save the voice as much as I can. But luckily in the interviews, I get to let the smart people do the talking. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this up on screen. I'm going to go ahead and mute, but I don't want everybody just to be stuck at the be right back screen. So I will, in that vein, be right back. Go grab something. I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. All right. Eris, come here. I had to bring on an unscheduled guest. Come here, sweetie. Let me mute this. This is my extra special guest. Oh, she doesn't want to come near me. Oh, puppy, I'm tethered by headphones. Come here. Will you come here? This is Eris. She's the best dog in the world. I love her very much. Aren't you a good puppy? She's being very rambunctious, which is going to make this next interview with Mary a little iffy. But she is, you know, the light in the darkness. COVID puppy was a real thing this time around. You're a good girl. Okay. Will you take it? Will you go get Mom? Where's Mom? She knows that command. She'll probably run. She ran right upstairs. She's a great dog. She's the best. Winners. I think I saw somebody. Vox is projecting Florida being called for Trump. That's not surprising. I don't think there's any major surprise there. I mean, this isn't a very good representation, I'd say, so far. Trump is outperforming expectations so far. But I would say expected, by the way, the headphones is while my earbuds are charging. Oh, she is a darn good pup. Oh, that's fantastic. Went up and gave Mary the toy. So basically it's like expectations were something around like Biden winning 350 electoral votes and Trump winning, 180 to 200-ish. So him outperforming doesn't mean that like, oh, he's going to win again. It is just kind of like we're not headed for maybe the landslide that was projected. So we'll kind of keep that in mind and figure it out. The reason I'm kind of using ABC News is, again, I listen to the guy who actually kind of makes the calls and does the methodology for them. And he is a real smart, real cool dude. So they just want to be extra cautious and make sure everything is exactly correct. Their goal is to have no redactions. I don't think they've had any in like the last 3 major elections. So that's pretty cool. Let me check in. Had Pablo's the other day. It was delicious. Yeah, I bet. Oh, hi, Doug. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I can't speak for which mainstream media flavor that you're going for, but there can be a lot of, I think, as Doug said, the dark arts. Doug Shaw, who was on earlier, not Doug, who said hi in the Twitch chat, but I'm happy he's here too. There's a lot of dark arts in, okay, what can we project? There's been a lot of talk about, okay, we're going to stop counting ballots at some arbitrary time on election night. Not the way that democracy works, so we're going to go ahead and kind of wait for a lot of those things. Mail-in ballots have thus far favored Democrats pretty heavily, so we may see kind of a small lean in that direction. So I'm going to kick it once again to our little BRB page, and then I'm going to bring in Mary, who may or may not be ready. It's her last name. There it is. All right. I'll bring her in, and we're going to talk about kind of what the last 4 years has looked like for her, and we'll let you all listen to her. She's a smart lady, and I'm really happy she's here. So I will be right back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, bringing it back, if I can find the correct transition, if I can make sure that the mic is working and that Mary's mic is on. My next guest is a pretty fantastic person by my estimation. Mary, 4 years ago, we were watching the election. We were in Cedar Falls at the time, and she was working as a refugee resettlement coordinator, I believe was her title. She can correct me if I'm wrong. But dealing with refugee resettlement and kind of here to address the electoral impact of what that was like. So, ladies and gentlemen, my lovely wife, Mary Reedy. There she is.
Hello.
Hey.
That's me.
Hi, how are things upstairs? I do want to
The
give the
dog.
disclaimer. The dog may attack her. That is...
Yeah, I tried to make myself a barrier. I cornered myself in the couch. And she's on the floor right now. So hopefully she'll sleep, but she might just show up. We'll see.
We will we'll hope for the best. So, can you talk a little bit about the job you were doing 4 years ago?
Yeah, so for many of you already know me, this is probably going to be old information, but maybe there's some new folks on here. My first job out of college, and actually starting my senior year, I started as an intern, working as a refugee resettlement case manager. And from there kind of moved up and was eventually a program manager. So I've seen the gambit of both the direct, one-on-one service, as well as what does this look like as a program and on the national scale and international scale. And did a lot of trainings along the way for volunteers and just folks interested in learning more about it. So what we did, and I can go as kind of big as we want down to as narrow as Waterloo, Iowa, what I was doing while I was there. But essentially refugee resettlement is, as it sounds, it is helping, refugees as they first arrive in the United States to your city and helping them through their first couple months as they start their new lives. So you are literally meeting them at the airport. So I was very familiar with the Waterloo Airport. They have 2 flights that come in. Did you know that from Chicago? One at noon and one at 9 at that point. So
I know that very well. Yes.
Oh yeah, and Danny, when my little car couldn't fit all the people in their luggage, would come and bail me out at 10 p.m.
All part of the job. So if we can start, because you mentioned refugees and people may not be exactly familiar with what is a specifically refugee is a very precise term.
It is, yeah. So, and I think that term gets thrown around a lot, especially a couple of years ago in the news with Syrian refugees all of a sudden, and definitely taking up the conversation. So refugee is somebody who has to flee their home because of persecution, because of fear for their lives, essentially. If that is persecution due to race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, they're part of a minority group, they're essentially escaping horrible, horrible situations, leave with not much more than the clothes on their back. So we'll get into it in a little bit, but when we're talking about the security screening for them to get here, just the amount of work and the hoops they have to jump through, because when you're fleeing for your life, you might not think to grab your birth certificate as you're leaving. So I primarily worked with Congolese and Burmese refugees in the central Iowa area. So everything I say, I should give a disclosure that I have been out of that realm for the past about year and a half. Switched jobs, and maybe we'll have time to talk about that at the end. I don't know. I might go on a rant. I'm 2 glasses of wine in, so we'll see what happens. But when I speak about refugee camps, when I speak about the experience, I am speaking probably very, very narrowly to the refugees that I worked with and that I met. So there's a wide variety of situations they come from. I don't know. I went on a rant. What was your question?
Yeah, well, I was going to say maybe we'll frame this in kind of let's take the view of a refugee. So obviously you are fleeing from your home, not a planned vacation, not, things aren't as good here as maybe I would prefer. This is quite literal fleeing of home with little, if anything. Where do they go? How do they end up there? And what's that journey kind of like as far as, the experience that you've had?
So it's geography, right? So a lot of the Syrian refugees went to Turkey. Congolese refugees went a variety of places, some to Kenya. They went to what was closest and was safe. So sometimes maybe their immediate countries around them weren't even, places they could potentially go for safety, but they would go to the closest geographical location. And that is why 3.7 million Syrian refugees are now in Turkey. It wasn't something that happened overnight, but it was, after everything went down there, they needed somewhere safe to go. And you go to the closest physical location where you can get some safety and shelter. A lot of these places have set up refugee camps, and some of these are stereotypical, like huts in the middle of a jungle. Some of these are more like apartments. Some of them, they live in the city and, kind of go about their day to day. The refugees I worked with primarily were that kind of cliche huts in the middle of a jungle. Those were Burmese refugees who were living in Thailand or Malaysia, mostly Thailand, and Congolese refugees where, if you pictured maybe the stereotype of like tent cities, plastic tarps and tents and for miles and miles, that was what a lot of them experienced. So when you leave, you are trying to just get somewhere that might have safety. The journey itself is extremely dangerous. People go knowing that they are risking their physical safety. Women especially, there's a lot of sexual violence along the way and also in the camps. So it's not, paradise once they get to these locations. And many of them are there probably average 5 to 6 years, but I had families who were there for 20 years, whose kids were born there, who met their spouse there, who got married. You don't stop living. But it's not, like you said, it's not a planned vacation. It is grab what you can carry, go to the closest location, and hope that, you are deemed a refugee.
So in terms of coming to the United States, can you talk through the process of, okay, you have fled, you're deemed a refugee, you get kind of settled in one of these camps. What do they do in order to, what's the timeline like between arriving at refugee camp and you're leaving for the U.S.?
So minimum of 2 years. I'd say 2 years would be fast because there's many, I don't want to say hoops, but many hoops, many security screenings, many medical checks, cultural orientation, 3 different interviews. I don't know, the United States alone. So let me back up. When they first arrive to a refugee camp, the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees are the ones that kind of deem you a refugee. They do initial like iris scans, facial scans, fingerprints, do interviews, do all these things to kind of double check, yeah, you're who you say you are, make sure that your story of events are lining up with what is known about what has happened in that region. So you're not, lying to try to get into the camp. So they do interviews. Resettlement support centers kind of do the same thing again. They're the ones who put together maybe a file, you could say, about your case. And, they see, do you have family somewhere? Like maybe you have a brother who came to the United States or a grandparent in Australia. So they do take note because the goal would be family reunification. If you don't get to really choose where you go, but the priority is kind of given if you have a family member, they want to reconnect you.
Gotcha.
So for the United States, additionally, on top of that, in order to come, there's 8 different agencies, 5 security databases, 6 background checks, 3 in-person interviews, and then medical checks, cultural orientation, the normal customs and border protection process when they come into the U.S. There's a lot. So I just want to throw out that it's bullshit if people say that we don't know who they are, we don't know where they're coming from, it's not safe. They are the most intensely screened and vetted people who enter this country. And they are here legally, they can work here legally, and they've had more background checks than any of us probably ever. So
the idea of like, this is a random person coming in that we don't know. And there are a lot easier ways to get into the United States. Say you wanted to do harm to the United States. Can you list a couple of the ways that are much, much easier to get into a country?
I feel like I'm going to get on a list after answering this question. But in terms of coming into the country, so. Student visa, tourist visa, business, any of those would be easier than this. So trying to sneak in as a refugee to do harm to the United States would be a stupid plan and could take 20 plus years because you don't know when you're going to get called. For context, there are 26 million refugees right now in the world. And last fiscal year, less than 63,000 were resettled. So do math person. 63,000 out of 26 million, less than what, 0.2%?
It's very,
Something
very
else.
low. We
Very
can just go
low.
with a very low
Very low.
percentage.
And so the chance that you are getting resettled, and they give priority to the most vulnerable. So how do you choose the most vulnerable out of this vulnerable population? It's again, reconnecting families. It's if they have medical conditions, it's women, children. So this stereotype that it's a bunch of, you know, young men coming to do harm to the United States is just false. It's false. So I get fired up about that one because people need to do their research. They need to see all of these checks that people go through. You'll see this narrative of news stories, and it's fair. You know, Turkey was, quote, overrun by refugees because they had this massive influx from Syria. And so they had to grow. They had to figure out, how do we do this? And there were bumps along the way. And so people see, you know, this concern of, you know, a mob or people you don't know and they're invading or whatever. And I have arguments against that as well. But for the sake of this narrative, that's not what's happening here. We know who's coming. They have a support system once they arrive in the United States. That's what refugee resettlement is for. So yeah, it's a long journey to even get here. And once you're here, it's not a walk in the park. I mean, you go from a place where it, you know, wasn't perfect by any means, but you in theory had a community. At least people spoke your language. At some point, you know, that became some sense of home. You had a routine. And then you're now in the United States where all of a sudden you're responsible for paying rent, and you get a 9-to-5 job, and you need to figure out transportation and speak the language and get your kids to school and pay the utility bills and everything else in between. So it's a lot. But I mean, everyone that I worked with, I mean, I can't speak higher of them. And I mean, a couple of families come with college education and they are, you know, kind of starting over. And one guy came with a degree in physics and started working at a meat processing plant because he was like, I gotta work for my family, and I'll take classes to get my degree here in the meantime. So these narratives that oftentimes are thrown around, people confuse refugee and immigrant, or they kind of lump everybody as other, is false. And I can also, you know, talk about the immigrant side, but I know our time is limited. So.
Oh, for sure. One thing that we touched on a little bit back, you said family unification. What was that like? Can you define that, and why? Who are the people that were coming in? Are they coming to join their third cousin twice removed? What is that like?
So I'll give the example. A lot of times, at least in this is my experience. I am one case manager in the middle of Iowa. Like every region of the country is going to be a little different too.
Sure.
But a lot of wives joining husbands, and this happens because they will meet in the refugee camp, have separate case numbers, have been, you know, interviewed separately, meet in the camp because again, they can be there for 20 years. Life goes on. They get married, they start a family, and then all of a sudden, one of their names is called. You know, the husband's brother got to the United States, and now it's like, okay, here's my chance. Do I go or do I stay? And then kind of go back to the beginning of this long line and hope that we all get to go again. So it's these hard, impossible conversations of, do you go? Because then in theory, the husband going might help speed up the wife being able to come and be with him then. So quite a few of those, which I cried every time at the airport. I'm sure the Waterloo airport folks were just like, who's this crazy woman just like crying in the background with my like blue folders and holding these IOM bags, giant bags that the refugees come with all their documents. But probably my favorite story, and I'll try not to get choked up again, 2 glasses of wine, who knows what's going to happen. But it was, I got to see, it was a Smalley family. And I got to see a dad meet his son for the first time because the wife was pregnant when he left. So the son was 3, so it'd been about 3 years, obviously, since they'd seen him. And I got to witness that in the airport, and it was beautiful. And that part never got old. I mean, going to the airport at 11 p.m. got a little old. But that part of it was why we did it, and why we were trying to help these families. So
Sure. And so kind of to zoom in on that moment, you have refugee living in less than ideal conditions, of course, flying across the world, sometimes going through O'Hare or LaGuardia or these big, crazy airports that they're not used to. We can kind of gloss over. There's people there to help them, so it's not just like, here you go, best of luck. But they get there, and I know with Waterloo, they were often transferring from O'Hare, so you would be standing there with the family, unsure if their loved one was going to step off the plane or not. And so this is kind of that moment that I want people to realize is like, this is, husband or wife who hasn't seen each other in many, many years, and you just sit and you hope that that loved one steps off the plane. And sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. There's logistical things about getting through the airport. But I got to be a part of that piece of it. And can you talk about one of the most fascinating things to me was just like you were kind of in charge of getting them housing and figuring that out. And then you just get to show up and you say, here's your home. And can you talk a little bit about like what that first night after they are impossibly tired, but some of the things that you saw or what you had to explain to them as you were kind of showing them this is where you live now?
The first night, because again, no matter what time it is, they're exhausted because they've been traveling for like 2 days at this point. But especially if it's at night and there's kids and they're exhausted, you take them to their new home. And so we do, as case managers, we were responsible for finding them homes. And a lot of that was relationships with landlords, some great landlords who were willing to work with us because it's like, okay, here's some people who aren't in the country yet. And also maybe they won't come because if their plane is completely canceled or somebody gets sick, like they're just not going to show up. And then can we have the money back? So we can help them later on. So really a lot of landlords that would bend over backwards to help in these situations, especially in Waterloo. There was like 2 or 3 guys that were kind of the go-tos and worked really well with us. But when we took the families to their home, again, it's a wide spectrum. I had folks who had never really had electricity or running water. So you're quickly trying to explain, don't burn something down, don't turn this, wait till tomorrow, essentially. And then we'll do a full orientation of the house. And we talk about light switches and the thermostat and flushing, using the toilet and then flushing the toilet and showers and fire extinguishers and locking doors and using the fridge and covering food properly. I mean, every time I would do it, I learned something new because all of a sudden I'd see a 2-year-old peeing in a garbage can and say, no, we don't do that. Because there's things you wouldn't think to talk about because they're so, second nature to us who've been in that environment. So the first night is really just saying, okay, here's your beds. I will be back in, 10 hours or whatever time it would be at that point with an interpreter. And then we go through all of that. But a lot of folks, who would share, who they would break down crying, and then I'd start crying because I'm a sympathetic crier, or I get really uncomfortable when people cry. It depends on the situation.
It's a coin flip.
It's a coin flip. But, they especially, there was a couple of women who just started crying because they're like, this is our home. We get all of this space because where they were from, they're like, we would get this room and we'd share it with, 2 or 3 other families. So they were like, we're home, we're safe now. And you're like, that's all we want. We want to be able to provide that safety. And then they just do such amazing things in their new communities that is exciting to be a part of that and see them start their journey. And shout out to all of the refugee resettlement folks and extended agencies, because refugee resettlement, also for context, is 3 months. We get 3 months to orient somebody to be, quote, self-sufficient in the United States. So imagine studying abroad or going anywhere where you don't speak the language and saying, okay, you need to be on your own and good to go in 3 months. So it's not enough time. And there are, especially in Des Moines, just so many amazing agencies that pick up after that to try to, keep helping folks. So, yeah.
Yeah. And to switch gears a little bit, 4 years ago, you were working in that job and obviously still have all of the passion. Can you talk a little bit about the implications of the last election and how that directly impacted not just the program as a whole across the country, but also you specifically?
Now I'm going to start crying again, Reedy. So when this resettlement started back in the 80s in the United States, every year the president gets to decide how many refugees are coming in. It's called presidential determination. They get to decide. It normally happens in September. And when it started, it was about 200,000 refugees. Like it was a big number. And that went up and down throughout the years, especially like after 9/11, it dipped to about 27,000. But since then, I'd say about 70 to 80,000. Obama was like slowly, like every year, it kind of just went up a little bit. And in 2016, because again, it's in September. So September 2016, Obama's still president. He set the number at 110,000, I believe. And I'm 100, 110, somewhere in there.
Sure.
So things are looking good. It's expanding. It's growing. Like our program at that point, I was the program manager or coordinator. I don't know. I was in charge of looking at things, and we were talking about maybe new staff or whatever to meet the need. Election happened, and the new president gets to decide the new number, and he then dropped it substantially. And I should have pulled up the numbers for it. But for context, this year is 12,000. So 110,000 4 years ago to 12,000. So,
and it was not a linear descent. It was a cliff.
Yeah. And if anybody's on, I haven't been watching the chat at all because I'd get distracted. But if anyone has the number that happened in 2016, it was like 30,000 maybe. So from even 110 to 30,000 is a big dip. So what happened is, as you can expect, agencies, because of course you get admin money. This is a federal program, so they are, supporting the staff to support the refugees who are coming in. There's less refugees, there's less need for programs. So all of a sudden, this nationwide, hundreds of agencies across the country who were doing this, you slowly start seeing them drop one by one. And actually, the agency I was a part of was one of the first to close. We made a couple national news stories, in fact, because of that closure. It started dwindling that, okay, if you resettle less than 50 refugees, you're closing, like period. Like we can't afford to keep you open anymore. And then that eventually raised to, if you resettle less than 100 refugees, you're closed. And that's what happened to us. We were in the about 100 range, but we didn't make that cut. So I lost I was doing what I loved, and, all's well that ends well, I guess, because we ended up in Des Moines because of it. I looked for jobs in that field and found it here and met some awesome people. Shout out to Monica if she was on. She was texting me earlier that she might jump on. So it's really an amazing community and amazing work that is done, tireless work that is done. But when people say like, oh, it doesn't matter who's president, oh, it's all just going to be the same. Again, it's bullshit. And I'm sorry, I think my parents might be listening to this. I don't know. It's the wine. It's whatever.
It's the passion.
It's the passion.
The
but it's ridiculous because this is I'm clearly fine. I'm employed. I have found a new job and I love my new job and the work that we're doing. But at that point, it's a big impact, and not for me because I'm fine, but it's then me telling these families, you're going to have to wait longer. Like, oh, you know how your family was scheduled to come in? Oh, they stopped all the arrivals. Oh, there's these travel bans. And imagine right now we're going through coronavirus, right? And many of us have been quarantining and not seeing extended family. And it's hard. Even going 2 months without seeing family is hard. And now it's been 5 years and now it's indefinite. We don't know when they're coming. And imagine having those conversations. And imagine being the person who's being told that. So this matters. Who wins tonight matters. And clearly you can tell who I voted for. So
yeah. Well, and if we can talk a little bit, this is one of the biggest pieces. You and I, we both kind of saw this coming in the moment. You talked about that infrastructure and all the landlords who you would call on. Yeah. If the numbers turned back up to 110,000 tomorrow, what happens?
So I've also talked about this with some folks, and obviously we hope the numbers go up. Like obviously we want that to happen, but just like anything, you can't go from 0 to 110 overnight. The infrastructure that was built, I mean, that's landlords who are willing to rent with you. It's a system with the schools of how to enroll children in a comfortable way where they have interpreters and culturally appropriate folks there to explain the whole school system. It's employers who will work with you, and all the different interpretation services, the medical services. There's just this such a wide net of folks involved. It's obviously not just case managers; they are one tiny piece of it. But it's this whole spectrum. And to build that back up, case managers alone, like maybe you have agencies now that used to have 5 and now they're down to 1. Building that up alone is going to be a feat, but building up that whole network again is going to take time. And a lot of people, like myself, who were involved in that field, now aren't. And I'm very happy where I am right now. I have no intent to leave at any point. So trying to get that, that knowledge, that expertise has left in a lot of places because these programs closed. In some places, they're not even open anymore, right? Like the agency I was a part of isn't doing it anymore. So even if the numbers go back up, they're not there. And I think that's the same across the country. So obviously want the numbers to go back up, but I hope, fingers crossed, if we get a new president in January or whatever, hopefully they listen to the experts and take a little bit of time and planning to do that.
Sure thing. Well, we're just about out of time, and we're going to have a little bit of an extended delay here as we wait for Sarah. But before then, Mary, I love you very much. Thank you for sharing your time, your story, something that we both lived through, something that was kind of, I think, taken from both of us as the direct result of presidential choices. So I couldn't have said it better. Elections matter. The rhetoric that a president speaks with matters. And there has been irreparable harm done to this community. I hate to put it on such a downer, but it is important, and it is the reason that I brought you on was people need to know that there are these direct impacts to somebody that they know. So thanks a bunch. We're going to take a short break, kind of let everything sink in here, and I'll be back. So thanks again, Mary.
Hi, everybody.
Whew. Emotions, right? I just thought it was very important for Mary to share that. That's something that, we went through, and there's been a lot of people talking about how presidents don't matter, or, oh, no matter who we elect, nothing really changes. How does your day-to-day life change? And I wanted to bring that in as an important kind of a story to be shared. And it looks like Sarah is kind of waiting to get in, and I'm going to text her back here. So I'm going to jump over. We're going to switch gears. Sorry, it's a little bit of a left turn, but we're going to do that, and I will be right back for you all. All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging out. We do have Sarah on the line. She is running for the Iowa State Senate in my home district. So if she wins tonight, she will certainly represent me in the Iowa State Legislature, and we're certainly hoping she's going to pull off a win. So welcome to the stream, Sarah Trone Garriott. Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Danny. Thank you for having me on.
Gotcha. So we talked just super briefly beforehand, but how is your night going? I mean, all the anxiety that the rest of us feel has to pale a little bit in comparison because you have a whole added extra layer.
There's a lot of layers tonight. I have my own campaign I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about a lot of other campaigns. So I was doing really great until I ran out of all the projects and tasks that I needed to accomplish. And now we're just kind of waiting for the results. And that's hard. I do a lot better when I have something to work on.
Yeah, we're in that kind of odd in-between space where you've done all the things that you can do, but you don't know the result yet. But I appreciate you taking time, especially in that kind of chaotic moment, to say hi, hang out, and kind of share a little bit of your story with us. So can you talk a little bit about the seat that you're running for and how you hope that you're going to come out on top tonight?
So District 22 is Windsor Heights, Clive, Waukee, and parts of West Des Moines. And really in West Des Moines, it can kind of go block by block. So it's a little tricky to figure out who in West Des Moines. You've got to look it up pretty much. And it is a district that's been changing. And so we've seen in the last 4 years, especially the last two, a growing number of Democratic registrations. And this district has skewed much more blue. And so both of the House reps for this district on the East End and the West End flipped in 2018 to Democrat. And so we were positioned for a really good shot at this seat, to flip this seat to Democrat. And one of the signs that we had a really good shot was that the incumbent, Charles Schneider, who is the president of the Senate, decided not to run again. So that was a good sign that we had a good shot, that it would have been a really hard campaign for him, and he might not have been successful. And so I have been running instead against a new challenger. So I feel like I've had a lot of opponents in this race. I had a competitive 3-way primary. I've had 2 different Republican opponents. And so my goal is just to try to come out on top for all of those folks. But we had in the primary really incredible turnout. I think that was in large part due to absentee ballots and the effort to mail those requests out to every registered voter in Iowa. And we had huge numbers that we didn't quite anticipate, with it being a pandemic and everything. And so that was a great opportunity for me to work really hard and get to know a lot of people and make really strong connections prior to running for the general. And so I'm really grateful that I had that opportunity. I had 2 other candidates who really pushed me, and I'm really grateful to them.
Sure. And, tonight, a lot of people have been focused on, big, broad, national, big, chunky issues that kind of dominate the national scale. Can you talk a little bit about some of your goals? It's obviously a little bit different because you're dealing with smaller, more intimate district in which you know a lot of your constituents. Not that, of course, the large state senators don't, but, it is a little different. Can you talk a little bit about some of the issues that you're focusing on here in Iowa that may not make, the big national stage?
Well, some of those issues are national issues, but it's how we live them out locally. So healthcare is a really important issue, but that really is about how is it playing out in the day-to-day life of people in our community? How is it impacting our healthcare facilities? With COVID, healthcare is on everyone's mind. We're watching the numbers of COVID admissions increase every day by a huge number. And so a lot of people are really paying close attention to our healthcare system. And folks want to see healthcare be affordable. They want to make sure that their out-of-pocket expenses don't, devastate their household budget. And for folks who need long-term care or have a chronic illness or just are struggling financially, to make sure that Medicaid provides access to the care they need. Because when our neighbors don't have access to care, that puts us all at risk. And that was really hard for a lot of rural communities and small towns when you don't have a good way to pay for care. A lot of those rural hospitals have to shut down. Those small clinics can't take those patients anymore, and people have to drive really, really far to get the care they need. So, it's a local issue, but then it's a statewide issue. Another issue is education. Iowans, we've always prided ourselves on being a great state for education, and those numbers, our ranking has been slipping pretty significantly because we had 10 years of chronically underfunding our public education, and we can do a whole lot better. Really make it a priority. Make sure that no matter where a child lives, that they can get a good education, that education encompasses not just the K through 12, but the pre-K and the early childhood education. And then also, the technical training and the 4-year degrees to make sure that people have those job opportunities that, really benefit our state to have those educated, prepared, trained workers.
Sure. And can you talk a little bit, you mentioned healthcare, education, long-term care. You have some personal connections to those outside of your campaign. Can you touch on those just a little bit to give people an idea of maybe how you arrived at these being such a priority for you?
Well, I was a hospital chaplain before I became a minister. So I spent a lot of time with people in healthcare crises and saw how important it was for folks to have access to care and what would happen when people didn't have access and then they would come in a crisis, and how much better it would be to make sure that people were getting care early on so that it didn't get to that crisis point. I serve on the board of a long-term care facility, and we've really found it challenging with Medicaid privatization to go from having those Medicaid claims paid in 1 week to waiting 130, 150 days to get them paid. I mean, it's really hard for an institution to make payroll, to keep accepting patients who are on Medicaid when Medicaid already does not pay for the full cost of care. And then I'm a parent of 2 kids in the West Des Moines public schools. And so I've got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I can see how their school just isn't quite as nice and doesn't offer as much as some of the schools in another part of town. And that's frustrating to see because we've got a good number of lower income families in our school, and just feeling like we don't quite have the same resources that other schools even in the same district have, and really want to make sure that all across the state all kids have access to great education no matter where they live.
Sure. I shared with you a little bit for our viewers. I used to live in Waterloo, Cedar Falls, right here in Iowa, which is home to, at one point, I don't know if it is currently, but the largest disparity between white income in Cedar Falls and black income in Waterloo. And there was an exact line when you looked up school and school ratings. Cedar Falls, it was between 7 and 9, and Waterloo, it was between 0 and 2. So Iowa is very diverse and has a lot of these diverse needs. You touched on a couple kind of key points within education when we talked last. Can you kind of tell our viewers what some of those are for either sources of funding for education or how you can kind of level the playing field? Because right now with certain funding, it makes it really hard.
Well, with our funding formula, we have an opportunity to level the playing field. And so if we have a larger portion of our school's funding coming at the state level, then we can even things out instead of expecting the majority of the funding to come from local property taxes. Because then, if you just don't have the tax base, if you don't have those expensive properties, then you're not going to have as much to work with. And we can also do a lot with the funding formula to wait for poverty. So we could, give an extra boost to those communities that need more support. And that's an idea I learned about from Brad Buck, who's the superintendent of the Waukee schools. He's like, it wouldn't benefit my school, but it would be really important for the other schools in the state. And so I think, we need to take every chance we can to try to make sure that all students are getting a really quality education.
Yeah, and I talked to you a little bit about your personal goals, and one thing I loved that you said was you described yourself, the ideal state of a politician, you want to be a connector. Can you talk about what you mean specifically by being a connector and what your role would be in serving your constituents?
So, this kind of goes back to how I've always approached tasks. When I was thinking about running for office, I think I had about 50 one-on-ones with people to try to learn more about what it took to run for office and to hear their insights and to make that connection with them. I was in AmeriCorps Vista in Gallup, New Mexico for a year, working for a legal aid program, and they really had no project for me. So I just went out in the community and started meeting with people to figure out, well, what is my project going to be? And so I still take that approach to everything I do. And so it's about building those relationships so that you can hear what the needs are in the community and then also see what the resources are to meet those needs. Because sometimes it's a matter of just bringing the resources together, helping people work together better can solve the problem or at least make a huge difference. And then also when you're present in the community, people trust you. And then they will reach out to you with their ideas, with their concerns. They will bring you in and see you as a resource. And that's something I learned as a hospital chaplain, was being on the floor, being present so that the staff could really get to know me and trust me and call me for lots of things, not just the worst case scenarios.
Sure. All right. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time tonight. Can you tell us a little bit of what the rest of your night kind of looks like and what you'll be doing and what you hope to hear tonight? Or are you not expecting results for a few days? How do you think it'll all shake out?
We're hoping that we'll get results for Polk County and Dallas County by 10. It's possible, though, that they won't come in that early and we'll have to wait. I do have a small group of volunteers and some family who are going to be gathering in my backyard to do a little social distanced just get together. And so, if we get results, then we'll have something to talk about. If not, we'll just enjoy each other's company and, wait to hear. It's hard to wait. But we're feeling really good about what we've seen and what we've heard and, the numbers that are out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time on the literal night when you're doing all of the waiting and figuring it out. And I have to say, as one of your constituents, I'm really pulling for you. I could not think of a better person to represent us. Just in meeting with you, your genuine, kind heart, and it's very apparent that you're here to serve. So I could not be prouder, and I really hope that you'll come to represent District 22.
Thank you so much, Danny. You have a good night.
You too. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, coming back super quick. People are neat, man. I'm so proud of the people who offered to come onto this podcast stream and just kind of share how they think, how they feel. It's pretty great. Oh, I see Aunt Angie in the chat. Thanks, Aunt Angie. Great people and willing to share their stories, be vulnerable a little bit. We're going to take just a little bit of an extended break. I'm going to go again, try to fuel myself through the rest of it, maybe grab a little bit of caffeine, take a little bit longer of a break, maybe 10 minutes at most. Also just kind of blitz through a couple Twitter feeds, a couple of areas where I'm trying to find information so that I can bring some things back to you all. And hopefully when we come back, we'll check in on the election. It's been a bit, but we'll see how things are going, how things have changed. And again, thank you all for being here. I hope to see you on the other side of the brief break, and we can figure out maybe where this election is headed as we get a little more clarity as time ticks on. Thank you so much, and I will be right back. All right, coming back. We're gonna dull the music down just a little bit. But those were some jams, huh? Pretty good. I'm gonna bring you back in full screen here. I've kind of updated, looked at a couple things. So state of the race, where we're at. If you're sitting here kind of wondering, okay, where are we at? This has been definitively better for Trump than initial projections. Also, I got the big cans on. With these bad boys have to charge just a little bit. So let me just go ahead and pull it up. I think that'll be easier to talk about here. So I'm using, first of all, ABC's map. I realize that other places have a lot more of these states filled in or called in particular ways. Again, I'm going with ABC News. They are trusted. This is certainly a time in which being correct is a lot better than being fast. So we want to be correct. Hang on, I'm going to check my mic volume. Looks like it might be getting just a touch spicy. And, oh yeah. All right, it creeped up a little bit, the gain. There we go. A little bit back in better range. So if we translate this map into the 538 model, this is basically what the race is currently looking like. Joe Biden still has a 68% chance of winning. And again, this says given that Florida and all these other places have gone for Trump, and given all these places have gone for Biden, that all plays in. So it's not just if we like the momentum, I guess I should say, is built in. So if Trump winning Florida, it doesn't just say like, okay, that he has Florida, that doesn't change anything else. It actually takes into account all of the changes and kind of plays that out. So as of right now, Biden is still winning in 2 of 3, but certainly Trump has made up ground so far. This is kind of the map that I think we'll continue to reference. I do have a couple others up that are, again, this is USA Today. I would say pay very little attention to because they are coloring states that don't have necessarily a great amount completed. It's just, it's too variable to kind of shade these things blue just because they're in process. During the process has no real, does not affect the outcome. So most of what I've kind of been looking at, I was kind of looking at Nate Silver again. He had a very interesting point. So this was an hour ago, so a little bit outdated. Trump looks good in Florida. Beyond that, not much. I'd say since Trump's overperformance versus polls in 2016 in Florida looks mostly to be concentrated among Cubans, that may not tell us much about other states. And this is the important thing to know, that sometimes one demographic group in a particular state doesn't necessarily translate demographically to other states. So that is at least what we know so far. Most of what I have seen is basically like this has been pretty hard to call so far, and people shouldn't be trying to overreact too hard. There's a lot of race left to go. I think we may firmly be in, we're not going to know tonight. This just ticked over, showing North Carolina now quite likely to go to Trump. With 80% reported. Georgia is still kind of up in the air a little bit. Obviously, probably Trump. But again, these 3 were President Trump absolutely must win these. Must win these states, or he'd be in very deep trouble. So far, I don't think we've had like a definitive, one state spelling real deep trouble for either side. Most things have kind of gone as expected. Again, if Biden were to pick any of these up, that would have been a race over moment. So it doesn't look like we are in that realm. But we still got a long race to go. There's plenty coming. I do absolutely want to say thank you for all the people that have shared the video, that have spread it around. I could not be happier, of course, with our guests who have been crushing it and just bringing a lot of great information. The comments, everyone's kept it pretty civil over there. I can't believe I've been live now for nearly 3 hours. Time has absolutely flown as I'm just trying to scramble from one thing to the next. So thank you very, very much to all of you. And we'll keep hanging out. We'll keep seeing what's going on. So with that, I'm trying to find interesting things to look at. Interesting things. This is still, again, my North Star, but you know, sometimes you get a little antsy and you want to start seeing a few more things. I want to look at the live results and coverage. I think this is a good place. So this is another good thing to keep in mind. The polling error that may be occurring is basically, it could be contained to the southeast. It could also be a sign of a broader polling error. We don't really know. Polling error, we need to kind of keep in context of what that means. A similar to 2016 polling error would still put Biden ahead. He would probably have about 310, 320 electoral votes. If we had, a not quite double, but a larger impact, if you will, in some states, that actually puts Biden around, 270 to 280, a very narrow win. But does still play in his favor. So it'll be interesting to see. States are different. They have different demographics. So try not too hard to say, okay, Trump overperformed in Florida by 4 points. Let's go ahead and apply 4 points to everywhere else in the nation. That's not quite how things are going to go down. So Nate Silver again chiming in. I think it's really tricky to get an overall state of the things across the country. Florida's like to go for Trump. Beyond that, the big shift to early and mail voting makes it hard to calibrate models and expectations and hard to know what to think. My best guess that the polling error in Florida may not be as large elsewhere in the country, especially since it seems to have been concentrated among Cuban voters, a group not present in big numbers elsewhere. But it's hard to know. It feels like we're waiting for the next big domino to fall ever since we heard that Trump got those good results in the Miami County there. So again, pretty good. There was a big thing that I had it already built in, that Biden would win Colorado. That was called very, very quickly. That's very important to keep in mind. I wanted to kind of see if there was any major Senate races called so far. Looks like we're not hearing a ton of other things. I think this is a good point by Claire Malone, who, if you don't follow her, you should. She is absolutely fantastic. I said this at the top, but it's worth saying again. In 2018, Florida broke really hard for Trump, and this was in mostly Democrats wanting to take the House, if you remember back and put that into context. Democrats are trying to take over there, and basically the Florida model, because it tipped all the models into like, oh, Republicans are going to retain the races, they're going to retain all the House seats, like Democrats are not going to get in control. Well, if you remember 2018, it was a quote-unquote blue wave, so it really, really pushed very quickly, and that was isolated to Florida. So if you're a Democrat, you're probably real sick of Florida right now, because they've kind of broke the wrong way a couple of different times. It looks like 2 minutes ago now South Carolina has just gone for Trump. Again, I bet this changes the results exactly 0, which is what you would expect. So you have to be careful when you see a new winner pop in, what that really looks like. Senate races, I haven't seen anything in particular. I want to try to pull up, I think this is the specific, yes, the Senate race map. We can pull up the model for that as well. That'll be a lot different. Georgia is obviously one where they have 2 different things going on. Again, he's going to pull this up, but don't look at this is 40% of votes, and that's not a representative 40%, so don't jump to any conclusions about who's going to win there. John Hickenlooper was just declared the victor in Colorado. That was a seat that is now flipped for Democrats, so that is gained 1 seat. You can see there lost 1 seat. If we jump over to the Senate model, this was very expected. Hickenlooper, 84% chance to win over Cory Gardner, and that was called relatively quickly. They didn't close down their polls too long ago. If you're seeing anything interesting or cool, pop it down into the comments. I'm reading those as it goes. Again, thank you. I see a couple people sharing the video across their Facebook feed. Of course, that it fills me with joy if you think the ramblings that I am saying are worth other people's attention, that's pretty great. So we'll wait and see. We have a North Carolina Senate race, which is kind of up in the air. Cal Cunningham was favored to win there. We can kind of check in, see how those things are going. Again, I don't even want to mouse over it because those are not indicative results. So checking back in, it looks like these have not moved. I'm guessing this Florida one's going to be stuck for a good while. So we'll hang out, wait and see there. In the meantime, I kind of want to go back to the theme of this whole thing. How are people in the chat feeling? What is your fear, your anxiety? Let's get a little bit of it out there. I think everyone's feeling a little bit like, oh no, this is looking like 2016. We were all predisposed to that. I'm not quite at that level yet, but I fully know there was a lot of prior anxiety going into this election. So feel free to voice that opinion. Get it out into the world. Current results for Texas are surprisingly even. Ish, yeah, 64%, but we may not know. I can check in. I do have this open when we will know for Texas. So it looks like there could be a shift in result. They have absentee ballots that arrive a day late, so that one's going to be really, really tough to call. It'll be hard to figure out exactly who is going to win on that one. Nate Silver, does he have more? Did I see a little notification? He's got more tweets, more information. So I think he is a little bit skeptical currently of the needle, and by the needle he absolutely means the New York Times meter that we've been looking at. So we'll have to kind of wait and see. And this is what election night is like for a lot of people. It is sitting, it is waiting, it is filling airtime and trying to figure out what you're going to do. Shout out to several people who I know who were watching. A lot of people messaged me, that they have plans. Special shout out to Mitch and Leah. I hope you're having a fantastic night. I think they may have ditched the kids in order to just kind of take a night to themselves, and very, very happy that you're spending it with me. I wish I had, overwhelming great results for what you may want to see, but so far that isn't quite what we have expected, or isn't quite what we have seen. Maybe not what we expected, but we're still in it. I don't think this is the time to descend into despair. I'm more anxious than on election night in 2016, but only because Clinton was so favored by polls on the day before to win. Yeah, the undecided vote was pretty heavy in the favor of it broke for Trump, but the undecideds were really, really high. So that lead felt less safe than this one. So we'll have to see. And I want to touch on this for everybody who may be despairing. If you remember in 2016, if you recall the results, Wisconsin, Trump won by 0.7%. There were several states that he won by less than 8%. And you kind of have to ask yourself a little bit, do you believe that Trump over 4 years has convinced more people, or do you think that people may turn against him? And we're not talking about all of America here. We're talking about 0.7% of people in Wisconsin, or rather really 0.4, because only half of them would need to switch. So you can hold on to those that hope, because this race is certainly not over. I think very tentatively optimistic is a pretty good way to describe how I am feeling as well. Also, I do see we have a trickling of YouTube viewers. If you jump over to either Facebook or I Am the Dinosaur on Twitch, you can chime in if you want to, say hello in comments or things. If you happen to be a friend of mine, of course, on the old Facebook, there should be links plastered all over. Anxiety and liquor. Yeah, I'm getting to the liquor point here soon myself. I've got a bottle of rum upstairs that's calling my name. So we'll have to see this. I'll be open about what I thought. I thought that Florida was going to go for Biden and that this night would then essentially kind of be over and be very different. Not what we've experienced so far, but I wasn't like, oh, this is absolutely going to be the thing. It was more or less kind of my, prediction. So we'll see. We're going to wait on a lot more of these states. There's a lot more for, whoops. This is, sorry, connecting to my old apartment website. Let me just get google.com and go back to the live map. Sorry about that. I hit a link. I was trying to refresh. I thought that they had called South Carolina, but maybe ABC News has not. Maybe I spoke too soon. And it looks like, yes, there is a fair number filled in there. So I should wait. I should maybe retract that. Mississippi, Alabama, those I believe have been called as well. We'll have to wait and see. Everyone's going to want to be first, so I think people are going to be jumping to conclusions relatively quickly. Biden appears to be overperforming in Ohio. I'm very, very cautious. Ohio would be a nail in the coffin for Trump. Yes, for sure. That is one. Again, if we look at the old snake chart, my favorite chart. I like the snake chart. Oh, we have to go to the presidential race first. Then we can check in on something else that made me think of. Ohio was kind of all the way up here. This is a good chunk. 18 votes is nothing to scoff at. And that kind of replaces, say, Pennsylvania. So that means, if Biden won Ohio, he could lose Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, Arizona, Pennsylvania, both those districts and everything up here, and still be the victor, provided he still kind of maintains his leads down here. But this is not a linear chart. I think that's one thing that may be confusing for some people. This is not like 50-50 area. Like in Nevada, he's an 88% chance. So it's very high. Colorado, which was called very quickly, was a 97% chance. So the 50-50s occur more up here. In Ohio, Biden, a 45% chance. That's not crazy, not outlandish there. And again, demographics play a big part in which states are called when. I have to see. Trying to check in. Here's a great Amelia Thompson DeVoe, who's very, very, very smart. I like her a lot, too. I've been keeping an eye on my home state, Virginia, which hasn't yet been called by ABC News. Zoom in on the map, and you can see why. Relatively little of the vote is in from major metropolitan areas. Those are all areas that made Virginia a much more reliably blue state in the past few cycles. So if that vote comes in, the state's going to look kind of wonky. So that's one of those things, again, without knowing where the vote comes from, that's going to be very, very, very important. So again, referencing a Biden lead in Ohio. ABC News has now... Yeah, I thought they did. Have they just not updated their map? Oh, I'm on the Senate seat. Oh, what a fool. What a fool I am going down that path. Yes, this looks much better. I was going to say, I don't think I made a whole bunch of mistakes on there. So here's the balance of power switching in 2016. So one of those has flipped back now. A whole bunch of House races, of course. Those are all the ones that switched. So it looks like Fox News Decision Desk announced a while ago that Democrats would hold on to the House and even gain 5 seats. ABC News has not. Again, I'm trusting ABC News. Not that oftentimes Fox News Decision Desk may not be exactly correlated with Fox News, the news division. Sometimes there's a little bit more separation than people give them credit for. So don't read this and be like, oh, this is just, Tucker Carlson calling the race or something. Usually they have very academic and very rigorous people in those positions. So don't dismiss Fox News outright. But again, I'm aligning myself more with ABC News. Johnson County, Kansas. Biden is +8. Trump won it by +3 in 2016. That'd be good for Biden in other Midwest suburbs. Very interesting there, of course. And that, again, it's trying to get county by county results and apply it to other places can be very difficult. New Jersey is on track tonight to become the 12th state to legalize recreational marijuana. They're the 12th state? That's even higher than I thought. Checking in, see if people have texted me things. Somebody text me and asked who's going to win. Typing out a link in text messages is the worst. So we're sitting in it. We're figuring it out. We'll have to wait and see if Oregon votes to decriminalize shrooms. I had no idea that was on the ballot tonight. Who knew? Go to Oregon, do some shrooms? I mean, that seems very Portlandish. So, if I can generalize just a little bit. So we're a little bit of a lull. Nothing has been kind of called recently. Trying to check in, see if Nate Silver has anything new. I'm trying to limit my sources because I did some work kind of pre-vetting a lot of things, and I don't want to start going off the beaten path into people that I don't know, and I don't know like exactly where their mindset is or how they view things. So this is very interesting as an add-on to that wealthy KC suburbs. 330,000 votes. That's 50,000 more. Let's do some quick math. 330 over 282, so that's a 17% uptick, which is pretty good. MSNBC is reporting that Biden's lead in Ohio is continuing to dwindle as results come in. I think that's pretty fair and expected. As results come in, I don't know if we can zoom in on any particular areas. I mean, we'll see some of these areas. Franklin County obviously is going to be a big one. I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but you can kind of just see, 51%, and there's a good chunk of people there versus some of these where this is 14,000 votes with 93%. So this is not representative at all. So let's not look exactly too zoomed in there. Up by 10K again. Like we're gonna hold off. We're gonna wait until everything's counted, just because I think you can drive yourself a little batty on these nights trying to dig into the exact counties, and kind of what I just did, to be honest, falling into that trap of, well, this county and if it has this percent. People like at ABC News, they have these models and they're very solid. So just kind of hold off, sit in the liminal space, which is a term that I've come to love over the last year. Shout out to Scott and Lauren if they're watching this for introducing me to that term with their podcast, because it is a great one. Liminal space is wonderful. So to wait and see. I'm strongly considering going and getting a glass of rum before my chat with Adam, who will be on here in about 10 minutes-ish. Very excited. Adam is a doing everything with his life kind of person. He's a composer, he's a comedian, he's doing YouTube videos. It's pretty rad. So I'm excited to talk to him. We're gonna have some good stuff going back and forth. Check in, make sure my wife's not saying, oh, hey, you have your calendar up again, instead of, hey, you have something else up. She's been great, checking in, keying in on me a little bit. It's been good. Do you think there's a universal way to handle voting across states? I talked a little bit about this at the beginning. The popular vote is just, some people feel that instead of viewing it as Democrat-Republican, I think it's easier to frame it as rural versus urban. So the pure popular vote method would very much favor urban areas and urban people, and yes, they tend to be. More so accept ballots after X days. Can you explain that just a little bit more for me? What do you mean by accepting ballots after X day? Are you dealing with postmark date? That's been all over the map. There are some states that certainly accept over, things that have to be postmarked by election day. So if you mailed it this morning, you have to wait for it to get there. We'll have to see if that happens in large numbers or not. We can check back on this, and this is looking more and more, basically, it looks like Trump's going to sweep most of these. Same voting rules for all states to keep it more standardized. Yeah, that's part of, like, just the state rights kind of things that everyone has done. A lot of people want to keep control of that. It is, I think, roped in with gerrymandering. Kind of both parties have their preferred ways. Voter ID laws tend to exclude certain people from voting. If I can try to stay kind of neutral here. There have been strategists on sides that kind of say, like, we look for these because we want to lower this group's ability to vote. Trying to check in here. Ilhan Omar, a high visibility candidate, won. I think that might be a bit outdated. We'll see. Georgia still had some hope, but it looks like North Carolina and Florida are both probably in the Trump column. They have not yet been called specifically, but they are strongly favoring that side, we will say. Oh, these were interesting. These were Fox News viewer polls. These are worth bringing in. Let me see if I can make this a little... Oh, here's Social Nonsense. Well, this is a... Should have done this earlier. This is the plug for Doug's book. I gotta make sure. Good thing I had it pulled up. This is Social Nonsense, so if you saw Professor Doug Shaw, he is a really fun, creative guy. He is just a very unique personality in the best of ways. He is just a fascinating person that is great to spend time with. So we put together this book, Social Nonsense, Creative Divergence for 2 or more players anywhere, anytime. And part of kind of what he said or described, or I think what I've read, is putting this together. You can kind of play these games anywhere. When you have, he brought up the situation where, like, when they're at dinner and before... after they order and while they're waiting for food, they create something. And I think there's nothing better than a little bit of fun creativity. You can also, if you notice, order on Amazon, bn.com. If you look, you can contact Doug, or you can, I would like an autographed copy, no additional charge, because Doug is cool, and he does cool things. So there is that. I pulled this back in. Nothing too much there. Trying to absorb as much of this as I can as we're going through before we kind of hit another lull as I bring in Adam here in just about 6 minutes. Again, when this loads, it kind of goes a little chaotic. Whoops. Let me go ahead and just refresh this. That'll probably be the easiest way. A few more house races. I have not focused on the house very much, so forgive me on that front. I'm not focused. That one's a whole different mess. There's a lot going on there, and should be relatively uninteresting. Senate race in Nebraska. That's no big deal. Really tight in North Carolina. Biden currently leading, so we will kind of see. Cunningham leads by a very slight edge. Again, it's really tough to figure out if these kind of results will hold, even though it's 19% of the vote. Again, it could be the 19 most Democratic or most Republican part of the state. There's really no way to tell. We'll have to see. Talking about litigation here, we all know which side is threatening a lot of litigation. This is a big thing. It's early, but Collins is considerably outperforming Trump in returns from Maine so far. That doesn't mean that she's favored, but that would certainly help. She was in a relatively tight race. kind of wait and see here. This is, again, an interesting point. If Trump wins Ohio by 1 to 2 points, that likely means, again, just because of the correlations demographically and geographically, which do play in, if Biden loses Ohio by 1 or 2 points, that probably means a Biden win in Pennsylvania. And if we flip back to here, to let you know, again, how important Pennsylvania is. Good grief. Sorry, I have a lot of tabs open, and it is becoming a bit of an issue. Here we are. Again, if Trump wins Pennsylvania, he jumps up to a 96% chance to win. And that's even if Ohio going to Trump does not really swing that much in his direction. So we still have some shots, but I don't think there will be many definitive statements made tonight. I think is something that we're probably going to have to settle into. This is going to be a where do we stand at the end of this, rather than a we know who won, it's just a matter of how much. I don't think any of that's going to be determinable, unfortunately. Have more coming in. Of course, Iowa, a good set of places will start closing here at 9 o'clock. On the other side of my conversation with Adam, I will be pulling up my my good old probabilistic model of how things are going to go. I think I can show just a touch of that if I use the interview overlay. We'll see. Forgive me, I totally didn't double check this. Sorry for what's going on over here. Let's get that back to, sure, you can stare at that one. So what I kind of have built here is a simulation. You can see in this giant spreadsheet. Again, don't worry too much about it. I'll kind of scroll to the important parts here. But I built a probabilistic forecast. So these are kind of dice roll to figure out if we can simulate some results. See if we can do this live tonight. It's my first time kind of trying to do it, so we'll see. Basically, given Polk County results, these are from the prior year. Or sorry, these are the Polk County results from one of the state districts from 2018. So again, if there's 25,000 votes and Sarah gets, say, 13,000 of them, it said she has a 91% chance to win. That takes into account a couple different turnout models, a couple different partisan swings. We can get more into that, but that'll be on the other side of a good chat with Adam here. So we are about 2 minutes away from that. I'm going to go ahead and throw up the be right back sign. I'll bring Adam in, and we'll kind of get things going for you. So stay tuned. Adam O'Dell, doer of many things, and we'll plug a couple of his things that he's working on. So I will be right back. And I have to mute the music to bring Adam in, so hang on. All right, everybody, coming back in, trying to make sure that I have the correct things up, trying to make sure I don't show my Google Calendar again. Slowly but surely, we're figuring out production. So, my next guest, I'm very, very excited about. Adam Odell, who I've met in Dubuque, Iowa. He is musician, comedian, YouTube creator, explorer of big brain ideas and how they kind of intersect in our lives. And I'm really excited. I have no idea where our conversation is going to go. Last time we veered into great topics, so I'm expecting nothing but the best. So here he is, bringing him in, Adam Odell. Hi, Adam.
Hello, how's it going?
It's not too bad. If you give me a half second, I need to try to fix an overlay little dealy.
I understand. I've done the stream life. It is a problem.
Yeah.
Or it can be, at least.
so you do so many things. Can you talk a little bit about how comedian, composer, YouTube creator, all of these things come together?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it all started when I didn't learn how to say no. And then every single time that I had the opportunity to do something, I'd just be like, yep, I'll do that. Growing up, I always loved music. There's video of me, like, I could barely stand up, and I was, like, bobbing my head to, like, those old 90s stereos that had, like, the lights on them that showed you that music was going. I just, like, bounced to those. And so that's kind of where that started. And since then, I started playing piano, and then that led to playing percussion in the band and all that kind of stuff. And so I always loved doing that. And I always just, like, especially when I was younger, I really loved performing for people. I loved, making people laugh, making people smile, stuff like that. And so the same reasons why I got into, performing music, I got into performing comedy. And so I've always just, like, enjoyed making people laugh and smile and stuff like that. And then as I sort of got older and more interested in politics and social issues like that, I really loved using things that are sort of comfortable to people, like, like comedy or music, and helping us to digest what can be uncomfortable things. And so that's a lot of what I've started doing in my life. I have done stand-up comedy, I've done improv comedy, I've composed music, I teach music, I make video essays about music that have a lot of comedic elements, whether they are fully comedic topics or whether they are difficult topics to discuss that I think comedy can enlighten. That's my thing,
Yeah, a whole bunch of different things. And one thing that I think really kind of drew me in, like, okay, I need to, like, pay more attention to what this guy is saying. And it came down to an award you talked about that typically kind of went to more of a classical music type of, and how classical music is kind of considered sometimes, I'll say colloquially, as, like, the good, pure, whole music. It is the purest expression of music. And you talked about how there was a major award and it went to not someone from that same culture and kind of check what you may understand. And that was, like, the first enlightening thing. So can you talk a little bit about, obviously, like, fill in the details of what that is and
absolutely.
You're talking about it.
Yeah, so I started being a YouTuber about 3 months before it was popular, as in January of this year.
Yep.
And I started, just making sort of regular music videos, not music videos. I will keep saying music videos. If I say that, I mean video essays about music. So I started making video essays about music that were basically like, let's talk about classical music in sort of these funny ways and sort of, like, help us think about how we perceive them. And so it was like things like, what if I played Brahms on a sampler that only played air horn instruments? And then 2020 happened, and my plans changed immensely about what I was going to be talking about. And this was after the George Floyd protests had started. Basically everyone was just taking a pause, and we were just like, we're not gonna, have our usual, like, jokes about, like, oh man, people and this about their coffee or blah blah blah. We all just had to, like, stop and really just reckon with what was happening. And in classical music, one of the issues we've been dealing with for forever, really, but like that we've actually been talking about more and more in the last decade, is how colonialism and racism have a place in classical music, where we look at a certain lineage of composers, mostly from Germany, but also from other parts of Europe, and then their students, their sort of musical offspring, as being like the best form of music, the purest form of music. And
can you name drop a couple of those for our audience?
Yeah, so like Ludwig von Beethoven, Wolfgang Amadeus, Mozart. You're like, basically, if you go look at any, like, if you have like a local symphony orchestra, or like look at Chicago Symphony, New York Symphony, blah blah blah, they're going to be playing Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, Tchaikovsky, sort of those usual bunch. And that's considered like, oh, this requires a greater level of education and more thought, and it's more complex music, and it's universal is the term that we often wind up using. And it gets to this point where we value that type of music and we value that type of expression over all others. And so we fail to recognize genius coming from other places. And so when we were talking about, what do we do to create a more just society? How do we create a society in which, we don't see like the George Floyd incident again, or the Breonna Taylor incident again? Within multiple parts of society, we start talking about, okay, not only does it have to be about like, stop killing Black people with impunity, it's also how can we give people, regardless of race, gender, sexuality, regardless, just a chance at life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness, essentially, right? And so in classical music, we have this idea of, these are the things you have to do. Like, your score has to look great, and it needs to sound like this, and it needs to use these certain techniques. And if you're going to apply things from what are considered like colloquial genres, pop, things like that, it needs to be expressed in like this certain way. And that's sort of how a lot of our institutions have behaved: journalism, academia, music criticism, orchestras. But then when Kendrick Lamar won the Pulitzer Prize for his album Damn, that was a major moment, because there were a lot of people within the classical music industry who were acting like, no, that is our space. That should be reserved for classical musicians. Classical musicians have always won that award, and it is ridiculous that this hip hop artist is coming in and getting these awards for, writing like a hip hop album. And then, of course, with all of that comes like these ignorant comments about like, oh, he's not even thinking about pitch. He's not thinking about this. He's not thinking about this. It's like inherently lesser music because it's not this certain type of complexity.
So it's like we all grew up with that classical music of like, this is the good, pure music. And it's like any deviation from that is not, oh, this is different and unique and excelling in these other ways that may not be important in classical music.
Right.
But it's like, this is now lesser because look at all these things he didn't do.
Yeah, and a lot of people just don't realize that there is a connection between not recognizing the value of hip hop as in its musical contribution or its cultural contribution, and the events like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. People don't see the connections between those. They think like, unless it is very directly and immediately about life and death, that it has nothing to do with it, and that's wrong. And so it's important to me that we recognize those things. It's like, okay, it's really obvious that we should be saying, Black people should not be killed with impunity for the police. Like, that's an obvious statement, but there's so many more parts to like the underbelly of our society that we have to fix before we actually recognize what a world without that division looks like.
Sure. I think that's a great way to put it. And one thing I love that we talked about a little bit before is that when you're talking about these things, the term that you haven't named is racism. There's racist undertones to a lot of these things. It's weird because we kind of came to this conclusion, like, we almost want to like tone down what racism can mean, because it can be the unbelievable, we all know what we think of as classic racism, cross burnings, Ku Klux Klan things, all the way down to very, very small nuanced things when it's like, somebody points out something like, oh, our view of classical music is racist, it's not like, oh, it disparages black people on a broad scale. It's kind of like, no, we just kind of need to adjust our view just a little bit, like understand where it came from. And you've done a couple videos and things that kind of explore that space of, these racist issues that don't have to be turned up to 100, but still can be very, very important.
Right. Yeah, it's like, because it's one of those things of, we can sort of separate these things on so many levels that they don't feel relevant anymore. So, like I had my guest on my second episode of my Racism and Privilege series. He was talking about, what it means to be a professional in the orchestras, and he's a black man. And, he's talking about, he can behave professionally. He can show up on time, have his music really well prepared, treat everyone with respect, but someone might view his natural hair as unprofessional, and, we have this idea of like, okay, so, you should have this like, straight cut, very, like very much like white beauty standards, or, white, appearance standards just sort of in general, is like, that's what professional is. But like, just what is naturally black hair is considered unprofessional. And if you get that, then that can be counted against you, and that might lose you a job. And that is one of probably the many contributing factors to why black people are underrepresented in orchestras, despite the fact that there are a lot of great black classical musicians who are really, really good, but they will just get ousted from job interviews or auditions just for stupid reasons like that.
Yeah, and I listening to kind of that video series, which I highly recommend everyone listens to, I learned a ton. I consider myself someone who is very open to many ideas and actively seek out viewpoints. You talked to a young black woman. I don't know your exact connection to her, but she brought up just the ways in which she felt the pressure that she had to behave, or she knew that if she spoke out about these things, she might fall into a certain stereotype. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned with her specifically? Because I found that resonated a ton with me, of like, look at all these things I just did not look at because I haven't seen them before. Yeah,
so one of the things that really stuck out to me, I can't even remember if it made it into the final interview. At least, I mean, well, actually, the full connection didn't make it into the final interview because part of it was me talking about, like, when we were interviewing, I talked a bit about my experience to her in order to, like, give her more space to talk. But then most of that video, I want it to be, this is her talking, right? But one of the things that we talked about, I remember in our conversation, was just in that I am a white man and she is a black woman, we could do the exact same things and people will perceive it differently. Like when she talks with her hands, and I'm going to start talking with my hands like I normally do. Like if you watch my videos, you will see I talk with my hands a lot. I haven't been doing it a whole lot because I have a lot of stuff on my desk right now, but I just trust me, I usually do. And when it happens with me, it's like, oh, hey, he's like this eccentric dude who's like telling us all this stuff, and he's really excited about the things that he's saying. But when she does it, it's like, oh, like it's coming off like aggressive and like a little weird, and like, why are you like getting so up in my face about it? And it's literally, it's not like, like really the only difference is our gender and skin color, but that will come off in a different way to people just because of the way that we've been socialized. And so that's crazy to me that, I, as a white man, like I frequently, people use the G word for me in like weird ways. Like they're just like, oh man, like that's like freaking genius. You know what I mean? And it's like, and like you're being like eccentric or whatever, but you probably because you have so many thoughts just going around in your mind. I'm like, no, it's because I'm just bad at organizing my thoughts extemporaneously. It might be that you don't understand me because I'm still figuring out what to say, and that's fine. But like, don't just like automatically give me the benefit of the doubt, And then in comparison, when she talks with her hands, it's like, whoa, like she's just like getting really emotional about this thing. And that's what sort of happens a lot, where black people will have to behave very white in white spaces in order to get by, and they have to sacrifice not only just like the way that they behave, but also the way that they talk about things. Like they can't be forthright about issues that are facing Black people in primarily white spaces, because it's like often just talked about as like being like hysterical or something. The guy that I interviewed in my second episode, he sort of talked about it like, he was like, in terms of code switching, which is what it's called when BIPOC have to be in primarily white spaces and try and like just survive and thrive in those spaces.
And can you define BIPOC for people who may not be familiar?
Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And so it's just basically talking about non-white people while also recognizing that different people of color face different issues. So Black people will face different issues than Native Americans, will face different issues than Asian Americans, etc. So yeah, BIPOC is essentially including all people of color while also recognizing that in America, it specifically affects Black and Indigenous people in ways that are different than it might affect like other people of color. And like that will obviously get into like intersectionality and how we talk about that. But yeah, see, and then now I'm doing that thing where I'm losing my train of thought. And so
sorry to totally derail you a little
code switching,
bit there.
right? No,
Yeah.
totally fine. So in terms of code switching, my first interviewee, my second episode, he said, in terms of code switching, I became bilingual when I was 5. Like he just learned, hey, this is the way that like you want to behave, right? This is you know, based on like how you've interacted with your family. These are like our cultural norms. But then when you go into talk to, you know, white people, you have to behave this way and you have to do this and you have to do this. Because if you behave this way when you're around white people, then you're going to get called this, this, and this, or you're going to be not allowed to do like this, this, and this, right? And so like African-American vernacular English, be like, oh, well, you know, like if you talk like that, it's considered unprofessional. You should be, you know, speaking with this type of vocabulary.
Mm-hmm. Well, people, I think that where that plays perfectly into is some people, which has been far more under fire now, which I think is the correct thing. People say like, oh, I don't see color. I treat everyone the same. I talk a lot about, you know, the subtext of that is I treat everyone the same, i.e. I treat everyone as if they had the same background and culture that I had.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you kind of bring that up, it's like that's not the same thing. People aren't saying, don't see my color, don't see my race or where I came from. It's like what you're doing is kind of
right. Yeah, you're
trying to fit them into your view of what is correct.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if you're like, I don't see color, then you don't recognize who they are, honestly. Like you don't recognize, like, because what Leandra said in her interview with me, it's like, I'm a Black woman. If you cannot see that, if you cannot recognize that, then you don't see me, is basically what she said. Because if you pretend in whatever world that like you can see a Black woman and you can see me and you'd be like, oh, I don't
they're the same.
You differently. You're the same people. First of all, you're lying, and like you need to just get over that. And then second of all, you're also not recognizing like she and I are not in the same industry specifically. She's in music therapy, and I'm more in academia. And like there's intersections between academia and music therapy, but we are primarily around different people and facing different issues. But if you don't recognize that like she is a Black woman, you don't recognize that she's dealing with more obstacles than I am. You know, for the most part, the system is built for people like me. And that's one of the things that I think is really important to talk about, is like, especially for us as privileged people, as in my case, as white people, cisgender people, straight people, right? It's important for us to recognize like, hey, I don't feel nervous when I get pulled over just because of the color of my skin. I am not worried about not being allowed to get married because of the results of this election. You know, that kind of thing. Like, I don't have to worry about those things. And then that also affects like how I'm treated at work, right? Like, you know, people will inherently treat me as being more professional because I'm white in most academic spaces, even in the ones that consider themselves like woke, there are those different behaviors, and we need to recognize that. Because if you're going to be like, oh, I don't see color or whatever, then you're basically pretending that their culture doesn't exist, that, you know, they see the world and they've experienced the world in the exact same way, and that their obstacles don't exist. And that's ridiculous. You need to be able to hear them and recognize them and understand how being black in America is fundamentally different than it is to be white in America.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to kind of reinforce there is I think a lot of times people tip over into, oh, well, because you are not afraid when you get pulled over, you need to go to this some weird self-loathing place about, oh, I need to, like, feel worse in this, or I need to think about this. And it's like, I don't think that's what we're asking of people. I mean, half of it is recognition. And if I can share a brief story, one of the best things that I've seen on this, because it crosses a lot of barriers, is in the NBA. They had a research project where they basically they rated referees, and they figured out, according to empirical data, they called more fouls on black players. It was black players were a majority of the league, so it wasn't like, oh, it's these specific people. It wasn't specific players. It was very clearly and statistically significant. They called more fouls on black players. So they went to the referees and they said, hey, everyone's being a little bit racist. Again, that turn where it's just like, okay, like this isn't, you hate these people and, you know, wish them harm. It's like, hey, you guys were systematically, we're a little bit racist in this. Can we pay a little bit of attention? By bringing it up solely and just making them aware, it made the entire difference go away. And sometimes that's all it is. I feel like we get trapped in this. Certain people, when you get into these, they think that you have to do these bend over backwards crazy things. But it's like, no, sometimes we're just talking about, like, just have the conversation. And I love what you said at the top. Be a little uncomfortable. Get into it a little bit and just listen. I think that's half the battle.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, like, honestly, in any situation where wrongs need to be righted, the first thing that everyone needs to do is admit what they did, you know. And it's one of those things, like, we were sort of like rounding our way to it, like the idea of, we only think of racism as like, I am cross-burning, or I am saying the N-word, or I'm doing this. And it's like, if I'm not doing that, then, like, you can't call me racist. You can't put me on par with, like, slave owners or, you know, people. And it's like, no, but here's the thing. Like, we do racist things, and it's not because we're bad people or that we have any, like, conscious, entrenched hatred of a certain group. It's just because we were raised in a society that was built by black slave laborers on stolen land. Like, we have very specific issues that are just, like, woven into the fabric of our society. And this could probably get into, like, a systemic racism versus, like, you know, whatever personal racism sort of conversation. But it's like, it's not that you are consciously doing something. It's that you don't realize that you're unconsciously doing something most of the time.
Beautiful.
Like,
I love that way to put
it. If you're doing something racist, then it's like, it's not necessarily like, and like, I hate you, like, and, you know, go F yourself and blah, blah, blah. It's like, hey, like, I don't think you recognize that you're doing this, or like, you don't recognize that you're, like, privileged in this way, right? Like, nobody will immediately look at the name Adam Odell on a resume in a pile of 80 resumes and then, like, throw it out because they're like, oh, probably not. You know what I mean? Like, that's a thing that we live with, and, like, that might not be a conscious decision on your part that, you know, your resume makes it through, right? But that's a privilege that you have, and like, that's sort of like the thing that you need to sort of tell on yourself for. Like, people who look like us need to be able to say, hey, this isn't right, and I'm benefiting from it, but it's not good for society, and let's call it out. You know, and, like, there's like little things, you know what I mean? Like, you know, like, if you're just, like, walking down the street and, like, you'll be like, oh, you know, if I'm approached by a black person or a white person, you might treat them differently and, like, think that they might be, like, talking to you for different reasons or whatever. Like, it's just, like, it's little things, and we just need to be, like, aware of them and recognize that the first part of changing something is recognizing it, right? But then if we just like keep denying it and being like, oh, I'm not racist, I don't have a racist bone in my body, I never do racist things, that's not actually helping the situation at all for anybody.
Yeah, and right there, it's like we all do racist things, and it's fine. We all do sexist things or things against groups that are not ours, because sometimes we don't have that same background. And I think part of your job is being good, well-rounded human being is seek out those viewpoints. I know for sure I have learned things from your videos when you discuss these things and hearing from people themselves that I didn't. It's kind of I think it's called Johari's window. It's like the things that you know about yourself and that everyone knows, but there's things that you don't know about yourself. And it's like, and that is squarely where a lot of that stuff lived. I'm like,
yeah,
I
exactly.
had no idea. And that's where you need to explore, and that's where you need to find those things of like, this just had never crossed my mind before. It's kind of like just ignoring it or assuming that it's fine. It's just not the line of acceptable anymore. We've kind of made it a call to say, hey, let's examine those a little bit. When you get a little uncomfortable, just lean into it a little bit. You don't have to get super weird.
Lean into the uncomfortable. Yeah, figure out why does this make me uncomfortable, and then also like the important thing is like when we think about being uncomfortable with these things, the next step is not what can I do to make myself comfortable again. It is what can I do to get rid of this thing that is causing the problem, right? So because I think that's something that I think a lot of people could potentially do with this election. If Biden wins the presidency, whether it be, I have no idea where we are at this point, whether it be tonight, whether it be, in a few days or weeks or whatever, there will be a lot of people who are like, oh, thank God, we're going back to normalcy. I can trust that the president will not say stupid crap on television, and I can just go back to relaxing. And then people don't recognize that Trump is the symptom, not the disease. And then they'll go back to ignoring the societal issues they've been shoved in their face because it now affects them personally. And they'll go back to, like, to sort of put it bluntly, let people who are underprivileged sort of be their shield again.
Yeah.
And so we need to think about not, okay, what will make me comfortable again? It's what will make this right.
Awesome. I think it's a great place to wrap up. And before we go, can you let the people know where you do these enlightening, fun, not always, I should say, not all of them are about, deep, heavy issues. You just did one on Over the Garden Wall that was phenomenal. Sometimes they can just be fun and, musical things. Where can they find you at?
You can find me on YouTube on Adam Odell if you just like search Adam Odell Music, you should be able to find it. Otherwise it's youtube.com/Adam Odell. You can find me on Instagram as Composer Mick Composer Face, or on Twitter as just Composer Face. Definitely if you're interested in hearing more fleshed out things about a little bit about what I talked about tonight, you can check out the Racism and Privilege series. Danny just linked my channel in the comments I see, so that's awesome. Thank you. And definitely, if you only have a limited amount of time and you're not gonna like browse through all of my videos, I definitely say go to the Racism and Privilege videos and check out the links at least, because it would be cool to have people on my Patreon or checking out whatever other thing I'm doing on social media. But I would love to have people learning about like Boo Lee Crosser or Growth Aesthetics Wellness, or my colleagues who are Black people who are doing amazing things and that will often just get looked over because of one thing or another. So please check out their stuff as well. I guess that's my pitch.
Yeah, I love it, and as I said, I couldn't recommend all of it highly enough. It's great things, and it gets you thinking in ways that you haven't before. So with that, I'm going to pitch it over to the old BRB. I'm probably going to go pour a glass of a little something, and I will see everybody back in just a bit. So thank you to Adam. We'll catch you in a bit.